Chapter 13. An Offer of Dragons. Disclaimer: I solemnly swear that JKR owns everything Harry Potter. Whether or not I am up to no good with her characters is for you to decide. /0v0 / Saturday, 25 November 1994. The Great Hall, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry kept his face firmly fixed upon his plate. Even to take a drink, his hand groped blindly on its own. There was no way that he had any intention of even meeting anyone else's eye in the Great Hall, let alone engaging them in conversation. Just a single full day since his spectacular rise to prominence as the nation's newest Parseltongue was nowhere near enough to dampen all of the looks, whispering, pointing, and cringing. If he wasn't so hungry, Harry may have simply skipped the meal. In fact, he'd had half a mind to do so anyway, but if there had been one thing that the Dursleys had taught him, it was to always take the opportunity to eat. You never know when your next meal might be. Thus, he gingerly slunk into the great hall for lunch. His option of which table to eat at had been limited. Indeed, he was hard-pressed to decide upon a table that wouldn't a bad choice. In the end, he took a gamble and chose Slytherin, figuring that a house with Asnake motif as their emblem were more likely to be lenient with someone who could actually talk to snakes. Judging by the way that he hadn't been hounded away the instant that he sat down, he took it as a good sign. The fact that those closest to where he'd chosen to sit immediately relocated was a negative. Overall, though, Harry took it as a neutral stance and dug into his meal as quickly as he could. "Harry," a familiar voice sounded as he was finishing his last bite of his roast beef and gravy sandwich. Swallowing quickly, he turned to look up at the speaker standing behind his left shoulder. "Hi, Susan. My auntie's here," she said. "She was wondering if she could talk to you after you've finished your lunch." "I've finished now," Harry replied, wiping his hands on the closest napkin. He stood then, dropping the used napkin onto his plate, and followed Susan from the hall. They found Madame Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, sitting, ramrod straight, on one of the benches in the entrance hall, watching the comings and goings of the students as they passed her. Her eyes fixated on the two of them the instant that they'd left the hall, and she rose to greet them. "Good afternoon, Mr. Potter," Madame Bones said. "Madame Bones," Harry replied, shaking her offered hand. "It's good to see you again." She focused then on her niece. "Thank you, Susan. I'll have to ask you to go now, though. This will be a private conversation between Mr. Potter and myself." Susan's head swiveled between the two before she broke out into a small smile. "Okay, Auntie. I'll talk to you later, Harry. Perhaps you could have dinner at the Hufflepuff table." "Thanks, Susan. I'll do that," Harry smiled back. Then, after a brief hug with her aunt, Susan disappeared up the staircase, which had conveniently lined itself up to take her. "How about a walk outside?" Madame Bones suggested. "Perhaps around the lake. There'll be less chance of inquisitive ears that way." With a nod, Harry indicated the great doors. The walk down the stairs from the castle and across the grass was held in silence, a silence that Harry found slightly uncomfortable. "Your approach to the first task was unconventional," Madame Bones said, breaking the silence as they entered the path between the lake and the forbidden forest. "You saw?" Harry asked, looking askance at her. "I did. Ministry department heads were given tickets to see the event," she replied. Harry cringed then, disliking being reminded so bluntly about how many people he had performed for. What had been worse had been finding out that the Wizarding Wireless Network had broadcast a commentary of the event as well. When it came right down to it, he thought that it was safe to say that the entire country, and probably even further abroad, had been witness to his Parseltongue ability. "You did not break any laws, Mr. Potter," Madame Bones assured him. "Your ability is simply that, an ability, no matter what others may think." "Yes, ma'am," Harry replied, though he was loath to believe her. The two walked in silence for a time then, a silence that wasn't broken until after they'd rounded a particular curve around a group of boulders that hid the castle from their sight. "I take it you're not here about the first task?" Harry tentatively asked. "No, Mr. Potter, I am not. In fact, I'm here to give you an update on our investigation into how your name got into the Goblet of Fire," Madam Bones replied. "You found out something?" Harry asked eagerly. "Nothing conclusive, I'm afraid," Madam Bones replied, sounding frustrated. "So what have you found out?" Harry asked. They continued on for a couple of minutes in silence before Madam Bones replied. "As you are aware, the paper that came out of the Goblet of Fire with your name on it was torn from something that you had personally signed, most likely from a school assignment. That led us to the fact that it had to be someone that knew exactly where you were. I then checked ministry records, and until you agreed to come to Hogwarts 3 weeks ago, there were no records in any department saying where you lived." "None." Harry stared at her incredulously. But I'm supposed to be this big celebrity in the magical world, you know, the boy who lived and all that, and you're saying Thatno Wunk knew where I was." "Ah, but you see, Dumbledore sealed all of the records pertaining to you. Even after you first refused to come to Hogwarts, he refused to unseal the records, despite all of the pressure that he was placed under," Madam Bones explained. "He could do that. As the chief warlock of the Wizengamot, he could," she replied. "I was actually surprised that no one came to take me to Hogwarts after I didn't show up 3 years ago," Harry mused. "Believe me, there were many who wanted to," Madam Bones replied. "I think that the debate in the Wizengamot lasted for 2 days before your uncle's letter to Hogwarts stating that you weren't coming was finally decided to be upheld." At Harry's questioning look, she elaborated for him. "Your aunt and uncle are your legal guardians, and loath as we were to accept it, he had the legal right to decide whether or not you came to Hogwarts for your magical education. There were many that wanted to disregard it. He is, after all, simply a Muggle, I believe the argument was. The idea of confounding your relatives and simply taking you was even seriously considered. However, ours laws are clear. The guardians of any underage magic user must be honored. The fact that you are the boy who lived was not a reason to disregard our own laws." Harry mused on that for a time before deciding to simply shrug it off as water under the bridge and concentrate on the matter at hand. "So, how did Mr. Crouch and Mr. Bagman know where to find me after my name came out of the goblet?" he asked. Madam Bones looked at him from the corner of her eye. "Dumbledore told them. It seems that he, along with Minerva McGonagall and Rubeus Hagrid, were the ones who left you with your aunt and uncle. It seems that they were the only ones who knew where you were." Harry froze and stared at the head of the magical law department. "Are you saying that it was one of them who put my name in the goblet?" he asked incredulously. Madam Bones turned from where she'd stopped a couple of paces further down the track. "I won't go that far," she said, before holding up a hand to forestall anything that he might say in response. "However, those three are the only ones who knew where to find you, that we know of at least." Harry shook his head. He couldn't believe that it'd be one of those three. Professor McGonagall was swiftly becoming one of his favorite teachers. From everything that he'd heard, Dumbledore was too much on the side of the light to do something so irresponsible. And as for Hagrid, Harry still remembered their shopping trip to Diagon Alley together with fondness. And then a sour thought crossed his mind. Hagrid is pretty lousy at keeping a secret," he stated. Madam Bones' lips twitched in a semblance of a smile. "I am quite aware of Hagrid's propensity to utter things that he shouldn't in places that he should know better. However, in this instance, we're pretty sure that this didn't happen." "Why not?" Harry asked, puzzled. "Simply by the fact that it took 13 years before any attempt was made to harm you or to contact you in any way," Madam Bones replied. "Hagrid has a reputation for telling things he shouldn't, yes, but the longer that he keeps that secret, the less likely that he is to ever divulge it." "So it could be any of them," Harry clarified. I'm afraid so. And unfortunately, my investigation has now stalled. Without even a hint of evidence, I cannot requisition the use of Veritaserum on them to find out who is responsible, not that it would be guaranteed to tell us what we need to know. Veritaserum? Harry asked, his head cocked to one side. Truth potion, Madam Bones replied. Unfortunately, Hagrid's physiology would negate its effects, and with how powerful Dumbledore is, I have to wonder how effective it would be on him. They walked in silence for a time then, passing the halfway point of the track and beginning their return arc towards the castle. Thank you anyway, Madam Bones, Harry said. At least you tried. You're welcome, Harry, she replied. And rest assured that, while my official investigation has stalled, I intend on keeping my ear to the ground. Hopefully something will turn up when we least expect it. /0v0 / Sunday, 26 November 1994. Harry's quarters, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry opened the door to his quarters to find a somewhat familiar figure standing there. He was only a few inches taller than Harry was, with powerful-looking arms attached to his stocky build. The neck of his dark blue shirt was open down to his chest, and his sleeves were rolled up past his elbows. Oddly enough, he wasn't wearing a robe at all. A thick pair of black pants of some strange leather and knee-high boots of similar leather completed his ensemble. The man's untidy, flaming red hair gave away his family allegiance, as did the vivid blue eyes that all Weasleys seemed to have. Charlie, right? Harry asked, causing the man's nervous smile to split into a wide grin. I was hoping that you'd remember me, Charlie replied. Would it be all right if I came in? Sure, Harry replied, stepping aside. Shortly, the two had settled in armchairs to either side of the fireplace in the small sitting area. How's Ramaranth? Harry asked the dragon handler. Good, good, Charlie replied. You have no idea how much you've changed things for us. Harry raised an eyebrow in an unspoken question. Just knowing the dragons' names has helped us get along better with them, Charlie elaborated. It's almost as though the dragons are seeking ways to interact with us, just to get us to say their names. It was the least that I could do, Harry shrugged. Charlie shook his head. You've got no idea, do you? Then, before Harry could reply, he explained. Until you started talking to Ramaranth the other day, there hadn't been a dragon speaker in close to 200 years. We dragon handlers do the best that we can for the dragons in our reserves, but being able to talk to them, that's always been beyond even our wildest dreams. Surely Parseltongue isn't as rare as that? Harry asked. To be honest, I'm not sure, Charlie shrugged. Here in Europe, and especially here in Britain, being able to talk to snakes and dragons has been very taboo. Only the most dark of wizards has had that ability. It's not like that in India and Australia. There they love Parseltongues. From what I've heard, a person with that ability can earn big money dealing with all of the poisonous snakes in those countries. And I just announced to the entire country that I'm a Parseltongue, Harry sighed. My friends tried to warn me, but... Hey, if a dragon spoke to me, I'd be talking back to them too, Charlie reassured him. Listen, forget what those idiots are saying. You've got a real gift, a gift that's neither light nor dark or anything. It's simply an ability, an extra language that others don't speak. It's a shame that other Parseltongues don't want to work in the reserves, instead of confining themselves to snake handling. Thanks, Harry replied. I'll try. It's nice to hear someone thinking something positive about it for once. Yeah, about that, Charlie said, before shifting slightly to pull something out of his back pocket. This is for you. Harry took the slightly crumpled envelope curiously. Turning it over, he found that it had been sealed with some kind of image that looked like a dragon's claw with a stylized R in the middle of it. That, Charlie summarized for him while Harry read the letter inside, is an open invitation for you to come to the Romanian Dragon Sanctuary any time you want. All accommodation and meals will be supplied, and there'll probably even be a small fee for any consultation that you do with our dragons. The second page is an open job offer with the sanctuary as well. Seeing as you can already speak to the dragons, your qualifications are pretty much already in the bag. But it also outlines what you'll need to do if you're interested in gaining proper qualifications. Harry read through the letter twice before staring up at the red head in front of him. This is real, Harry breathed. You better believe it, Charlie grinned. We wanted to get in first before the other reserves started bombarding you with offers. Sure, there aren't many dragon reserves in the world, only ours, the Australasian Dragon Preserve, the Aztec Reserve for Dragons, the Draconian Sanctuary of Tanzania, and the Mongolian Dragon Park, Charlie explained. You can bet your last galleon that you'll be getting offers like ours from all of them. Someone who can talk to dragons is worth way more than their weight in gold to us. But we reckon that we've got the inside track. We've got something that the others don't we? Harry blinked, his mind whirling before the grin on his face matched the man's across the table. Ramaranth. Exactly. Thanks a lot, Harry replied. I'll definitely think about it. You do that, Harry, Charlie said. At the very least, come for a holiday and check us out. You can show Ramaranth her finished picture. Thanks, I might just do that, once this tournament is finished, Harry replied. Great. Listen, I'd better go. We're moving the dragons back home this afternoon, and there's a heap of work to do to get ready, Charlie said, rising from his chair. The two shook hands. Good luck with the tournament. Harry and I hope to see you in the summer, Charlie said. /0v0 / Wednesday, 29, November 1994. Harry's workshop trunk, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry stared in horror at the thing beneath his hands. His heart was pounding, and his breath was coming in short, sharp pants. What in the hell was that? He questioned. Daringly, he twisted the golden latch and let the sides of the egg fall open once again. Just as it had moments before, the egg began its high-pitched wail at a volume to cause his ears to ring. After less than 5 seconds, Harry's hands were scrambling to pull the sides of the open egg back together and to lock them into place once more. His hand groped behind him before latching onto a comforting, familiar shape. Automatically, he brought his arm up, his muscles quivering in desire to bring the hammer down on top of the foul thing again and again and again. But he simply couldn't do it. Even though he had no intention of even trying to compete in the damned tournament, he might still need the egg in one piece. Slowly, he let his arm drop before allowing the hammer to fall to the floor. Well, that was a waste, he remarked. Probably some weird banshee's cry, and it's something that I ever want to hear again. Hefting the egg, Harry crossed the room. It was nice of Mr. Bagman to bring him his egg and to inform him that he'd managed to score a whole 12 points in the first task. But if this was the only clue that he was getting to the second task, then he could write it off now. Shoving the egg into the back of the bottom shelf of the cupboard, Harry slammed the door and gave a short, sharp nod. Out of sight, out of mind, sounded perfect to him. /0v0 / Thursday, 30 November 1994. Transfiguration Classroom, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Excellent work, Mr. Potter, Professor McGonagall said. I think that we'll leave it there for this evening. Harry barely spared the old Transfiguration teacher a glance before frowning back down at his evening's work. 4 hairbrushes, each slightly more elaborate than the one before it lay in a row on the left side of the desk. All were made of pine with hard, plastic bristles. Conversely, on the right side of his desk, half a dozen pinecones innocently marked him. It had taken him only 4 goes trying to turn a pinecone into a hairbrush with his wand before he'd mastered it for the first time. As with his other charms and transfiguration lessons, he'd quickly seen that the true part of the magic lay within his own mind, the way that he imagined the finished product. But when it had come to completing the same task wandlessly, he'd failed abysmally. Each time that he'd attempted the transfiguration, the pinecone had shimmered and started to blur before promptly reverting back to its original shape. "I wouldn't worry about it too much," Professor McGonagall said, patting him on the shoulder. "What you've already been able to accomplish without a wand is nothing short of remarkable. I'm sure that with a little more practice, you'll manage this as well." "Can I take a couple of the pinecones with me?" Harry asked. "Certainly," she replied, prompting him to deposit the remaining pinecones into his bag with a sweep of his hand. "Before you go, Mr. Potter," Professor McGonagall said, causing Harry to turn back towards her, "I need to inform you about the next event in the TriWizard tournament. I thought that the second task wasn't until February, and we only had that egg as a clue." Harry frowned. "While that is true, there is another event before that," Professor McGonagall stated. "The Yule Ball." Harry's eyes narrowed. "Ball, as in dancing." "Indeed, Mr. Potter," Professor McGonagall confirmed. "I don't dance," Harry stated with a shake of his head. "You do now," Professor McGonagall retorted. "The Yule Ball will be held on Christmas night, beginning promptly at 6. Every champion will be required to have a partner and will commence the evening with the champion's dance." "I don't dance," Harry repeated, his tone indicating his panicked state. Professor McGonagall's face mellowed slightly. "As soon as you have a partner, Mr. Potter, come to me, and I'll give the two of you some dance lessons." Harry opened his mouth to protest once again, only to have his jaw snap shut at the fierce glare that she shot him. "Yes, ma'am," he swallowed. Chapter 14. Sane. Insane. It's all overrated anyway. Disclaimer: I solemnly swear that JKR owns everything Harry Potter. Whether or not I am up to no good with her characters is for you to decide. /0v0 / Saturday, 2 December 1994. St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries, London. The face in the mirror was almost one that he remembered. Almost, but not quite. There were aged lines around his mouth, eyes and forehead that weren't there before, well before. His long dark hair, now washed, cut and styled, had the first inkling of greys if one looked close enough, something that, as a wizard, shouldn't have appeared for at least another decade. The cheeks, at least, were no longer sunken, making his cheekbones and jawlines stick out comically. Instead, there was a healthy shape to them. And then there were the eyes. They were as smoky grey as they'd always been, but now they held the lingering touch of his past. Haunted eyes, eyes that had seen far too much dread and despair. Too many long, dark years with nothing to smile about, much less laugh at. In all honesty, his eyes had lost much of their vacant and horror-filled echoes since he'd been confined here, but the past remained for all to see. Stepping back, he took in more of his appearance. His clothes, a drab white hospital gown and white drawstring pants, looked comfortable on his frame. No longer did they hang loosely. He'd put on weight since he'd been here, indeed. How could he not after the trays and trays of food that they'd forced on him, in conjunction with the gallons of potions that he'd been made to consume? Physically, he felt fine, better than he'd felt in over a decade, in fact. A lopsided grin appeared on his face at the thought. Really, how could Hennett feel better? The healers had had him doing basic exercises since he'd been brought here, all with the purpose of getting his muscles working again. He may not be up to running a marathon, or even what he was once able to do as an aura, but he was physically ready to take on the world. Mentally, though, that was the question. Was he ready to leave here, to head out into the masses? But the question wasn't one that he could answer. More, it was one that he had no use for. He'd been held here for 6 months now. He'd been around healers and medi-witches constantly. He'd had friends and family visit. Ministry officials had even dropped by, although in their case it was as infrequent as possible. And while all that was good and fine, there was one thing that was missing, the one reason that he was no longer in Azkaban, the one person that he'd broken out for, the one person that he'd been kept away from. His godson. Harry Potter. Sirius Black knew that he'd had enough of St. Mungo's. While the hospital had been good for his health, both physically and mentally, it wasn't completely what he needed. Nearly a year and a half ago, he'd broken out of the most secure wizarding prison in the world, Azkaban, with the express purpose of protecting his godson. The Minister for Magic himself had inadvertently provided the impetus that he'd needed, giving him a newspaper with a picture of the rat traitor, Pettigrew, on the front page. Finding out that the rat was sharing a dormitory at Hogwarts with Harry, really, Harry simply had to be a Gryffindor. He'd expect no less, had been all that Sirius had needed to break out. Knowing that it had been the summer holidays, he'd briefly stopped by Lily's sister's place to see Harry. The boy wasn't as tall or as muscled or even looked as well-fed as Sirius would have liked. But he was a Potter, James again, through and through, but with Lily's eyes. He'd stayed for a day and a night before moving on. And then had come the real kicker. Harry Potter wasn't a Hogwarts student. How that been allowed, he had no idea. It was something that he, as Harry's godfather, was determined to put right, after he'd dealt with the bloody rat, of course. Then had come the year-long game of cat and mouse, sneaking into the castle, avoiding the patrolling Dementors, even managing to enter Gryffindor Tower once, even if he did have to leave empty-handed in a hurry. And of course, dodging Remus. His old marauder pal hadn't known about the change in secret keepers, and Sirius was sure that Remus blamed him for what had happened to James and Lily. And then everything had come to a head at the end of May. Sirius had managed to catch the red-headed boy and the rat out after curfew and to squirrel them off to the Shrieking Shack. The fact that Mooney had seen it happen from his classroom window and followed without alerting anyone else had been a blessing. And then Sirius had managed to reverse Pettigrew's animagus form, right when Remus stepped through the bedroom door. Explanations, revelations, and manly hugs abounded before Remus managed to stop Sirius from killing Pettigrew there and then. He'd had to turn himself in to the DMLE, but with Pettigrew firmly in hand, it hadn't taken long for the Ministry to arrange for a dual trial, a trial that ended with Sirius being exonerated and Pettigrew being found guilty and given the Dementor's kiss. For one brief, shining moment, Sirius had envisioned striding from the building and apparating straight to Harry. The Ministry, of course, had had other ideas. They'd wanted to compensate him for what he'd had to suffer for the past 12 years. That's when he'd found himself in the clutches of the healers of St. Mungo's Hospital, and they weren't keen on letting him go, not until he was completely healed, mind and body. 6 months, they'd promised. And now 6 months had come and gone, and Sirius was itching to get out. Harry, he'd read, had returned to the magical world after being entered into the TriWizard tournament, and he'd already had to face dragons in the past month. There was no way that Sirius had any intention of letting him face anything else without his godfather firmly by his side. As if he'd been summoned by Sirius' very thoughts, the door to his room opened, and Healer Kellingsworth strode in reading the chart that he was carrying. "Mornin', Raymond," Sirius called, forcing his voice to sound jovial rather than anxious. "Mr. Black, how are you feeling this morning?" Healer Kellingsworth replied. "Fit as a fiddle and raring to go," Sirius replied. "That's good to hear," Healer Kellingsworth nodded. "And it seems that all of the Mediwitches agree. Or at least, the Mediwitches are all eager for you to leave so that they can get a bit of peace and quiet again." Sirius grinned lopsidedly. "Well, if we're all in agreement, I'll just go pack my bags then." "Hold on a minute, Sirius," Healer Kellingsworth replied. "There's one more person who needs to agree before you can be released." "Oh, who would that be?" Sirius asked. "Me," Healer Kellingsworth replied simply. "And what's your opinion?" Sirius asked lightly, repressing the urge to throttle the man that kept dangling the carrot of escape in front of him. "Your progress has been remarkable. You've responded well to your physical therapy, you've put on the required weight that we wanted, and your psychological sessions have been very promising." However, I'd like to see you have a little more exposure to the outside world and evaluate how you deal with it before we fully release you from St. Mungo's." "And what does that entail?" Sirius frowned. "Nothing more complex than having you spending time in the waiting room interacting with the general public," Healer Kellingsworth assured him. Sirius sighed. "All right, but can you at least tell me when I'm likely to get out of here?" The healer smiled at his patient. "1 week, Mr. Black. 1 week, and if all goes as I expect it to, you'll be discharged." 1 week, Sirius could handle that. 1 more week, and he'd finally get to see Harry again. /0v0 / Saturday, 2 December 1994. The shore of the Black Lake, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. "You know that you're an idiot, don't you?" Neville Longbottom didn't even turn when he gave his reply. But then, a two-fingered salute didn't exactly warrant much attention. Harry grinned and shook his head. It was winter. The snow was a couple of inches thick on the ground, less so under the trees. A faint wind took the edge off of any warmth that the paltry sun provided, but none of that was stopping Neville in his insanity. Rugged up under 3 thick blankets, another 2 under him, reaching up his back against the tree that he leant against, Harry watched his friend. Neville was currently standing thigh-deep in the Black Lake, nearly bent in half as he did whatever it was he was doing with the plants under the surface. Supposedly, he was working on an extra credit assignment for Madam Sprout, but Harry couldn't see how it was worth it. His friend simply had to be freezing. Giving Neville's sanity, or lack thereof, up as a lost cause, Harry turned back to the current tome that he was reading. It was part of a set of 7 that he'd picked up in Gringotts a month ago. Each of these was written by one of his parents. The 7 journals, 5 from his mother, 2 from his father, had been sitting on a bookshelf in his family vault, and the instant that he'd seen them and realized what they were, he'd latched on to them. Unfortunately, with the limited amount of time that he had for leisure pursuits here at Hogwarts, he'd barely cracked their spines. The 3 thinnest, Harry'd found, dealt with subjects that he was currently studying, potions and charms written by his mum, and transfiguration from the pen of his father. They were currently well above his knowledge and skill level, but he hoped that, even if he couldn't learn much from them yet, that at the very least, it'd give him an insight into his parents' minds and personalities. The next 3 books were the personal diaries of Lily Evans. At least the first 2 were. The third was the diary of Lily Potter. His mother had apparently been one to record her thoughts and musings since her very first day at Hogwarts all the way up to her graduation, her marriage to James Potter, her pregnancy, birth, and even the raising of little Harry James Potter. Flicking through these, Harry'd been amazed at the varieties of different colored inks, the doodles that she'd done, and all of the little extras. The very first flower that James had ever given her, a lily, had been pressed between its pages. In the last, he'd even come across an inked handprint that apparently had been done by him when he was only 10 days old. And then there was the very last diary, the one that he was currently puzzling through. This one was supposedly written by his father, although Harry was certain that he'd seen for different styles of writing between its incredibly fat pages. The biggest problem that Harry had was that there was only one word that he'd been able to read out of all of the hundreds of pages of the book. Anthytha had been on the front cover. Marauder. Exactly what that one word meant was anyone's guess. From the scattered animated drawings that Harry'd seen, Hegger said that it was a book of pranks, and from the pictures of wand movements and potion vials, he assumed that some of those pranks were fairly elaborate. Unfortunately, even though there were hundreds of pages in the book, Harry had yet to even be able to see some of those pages. Some were blank, others were stuck together, by magic most likely, and all of the writing in it, from every one of those 4 different hands, was complete gibberish. There wasn't even a familiar letter in there anywhere. Sighing with annoyance, Harry replaced the thick elastic band that went around the book to hold it together and placed it on top of the pile beside him. There was simply no way that he'd ever be able to guess the password to get the book to reveal its secrets to him. Assuming, of course, that there was one in the first place. He just picked up his father's Transfiguration journal in the vain hope that it might hold the clue that he needed when he was interrupted by a squelching Neville. "They're coming along nicely," he smiled. "I'd think that we'll be able to harvest them in another month." "You're insane," Harry couldn't help but repeat. "I'm insane. Look, mate, I'm wearing 3 pairs of woolen pants under these." Neville pointed to the all-in-one thick leather pants that included the boots, Antwo vests, a shirt and jumper. That's not to mention the warming charm that I put on myself before we came down here. If you want insane, try out there. Harry's eyes followed where Neville was wildly gesturing. Across the lake, bobbing slightly at anchor, lay the enormous shipwreck that apparently wasn't, otherwise known as the ship of Durmstrang Institute. And on its deck, wearing only a pair of incredibly brief swimming trunks, was the Durmstrang champion, Victor Crumb. Harry's mouth dropped open as Crumb swung his arms about for a moment before stepping briskly to the side and diving headlong into the freezing waters of the Black Lake. "I take it all back, Nev. You're the epitome of sane." "He's the one who's insane," Harry said. "I know," Neville agreed, hopping on one foot as he pulled off the thick leather pants. "And would you believe that he's been swimming like that every day for the past week?" "What?" Harry asked. "Yep, I've seen him swimming in the lake every day that I've come down here to check on the fanwort," Neville replied. "I guess that the lake isn't as cold as the water back home," Harry suggested. "Probably," Neville replied. "Although, personally, I suspect that he's getting ready for the next task." Harry looked up sharply at the other boy. "Why do you say that?" "Because I've seen both Diggory and the Beauxbatons champion and a headmistress down here staring at the lake an awful lot as well," Neville shrugged. "Do you know what the second task is?" "No idea," Harry frowned. "Bagman gave me the egg that Ramaranth retrieved for me, but all it does is wail so loud that it gives me a headache." "At least it's still a few months away," Neville said. "Yeah," Harry agreed darkly. "If only that was the only task that I had to worry about." "What do you mean?" Neville asked, plonking down beside him, having finally divested himself of his water gear. Harry stared at his friend askance. "What do I mean? The bloody Yule Ball, that's what. McGonagall says that I have to go and dance." "Yeah," Neville said slowly. "That means finding a date, Nev," Harry groused. "How am I supposed to find a date? About the only 3 girls I know are Daphne, Susan, and Hermione, and I wouldn't say I know them well enough to ask to a dance." "That is a bit of a tough one," Neville commiserated. "But I wouldn't wait too long if I were you. According to Hannah, who had it from Padma, Hermione's already got a date. Not that she's telling anyone who she's going with." Harry stared at his friend. "That is not helping, Neville, not helping at all." /0v0 / Thursday, 6 December 1994. Ancient Runes Classroom, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Giving his sandstone one last gentle blow, Harry examined his work. His eyes flittered backwards and forwards between the sandstone tablet and the book in front of him. As far as he could see, the runes were identical. With a smile and a flourish, Harry picked up the tablet and passed it across to Daphne. He watched as her critical eye examined his work in minute detail. Even after only 4 weeks being tutored by her, he'd worked out that she accepted nothing less than perfection. "Very good, Harry," she smiled, her blue eyes shining. With a sigh of relief, Harry returned the smile. "Thanks, it wasn't as hard as I thought that it would be." "That's because you were simply carving a single rune in a very forgiving medium," she replied. "Just wait until Professor Babbling has you carving a couple of dozen of them into marble or silver." No, that doesn't sound fun at all," Harry agreed. Daphne flicked her long black hair back from where it had fallen across her shoulders as she placed the tablet back on the table. "Now the rune you just carved means?" she asked expectantly. Color, Harry replied. Specifically, the color green. In what language? Norse, Harry replied confidently. Very good, Daphne praised. Now, I want you to watch me as I carve some additional runes around that one rune. Harry shuffled around the side of the table to give her room to work. His eyes never strayed as Daphne picked up the chalk and quickly sketched an additional 4 runes. Satisfied with her work, she then began to carefully carve out the runes using different-sized chisels and a tiny hammer and a small paintbrush to clear away the dust. Can you recognize any of these runes? Daphne asked when she finished, her eyes flicking up to his. 2 of them, I think, he replied hesitantly. Which ones and what do they mean? She asked. Hesitantly, he reached out and tapped 2 of the runes. This one means power, and I think this one means change, he told her. Well done, Daphne praised. The others are activate and touch. Do you see how I've linked them together? Staring hard at the sandstone, Harry moved back around the table to get a better look at the carved tablet. It's almost like a sentence, Harry said. Exactly. Runes can be linked together like a sentence to provide meaning and shape, not only in what they say, but in what they do, Daphne explained. Really, this isn't something that Professor Babbling would have you do until after Easter at the earliest. But I didn't think that it'd hurt to give you a little taste of what's to come. Now, the way that I've linked these 5 runes together means that they will work together to produce an outcome. Can you guess what it might be? Harry stared at the runes some more before darting his eyes to his tutor. He could see her eyes shining with excitement for the subject, but at the same time, she was the very definition of patience, allowing him to make discoveries and even the occasional error on his own. Feeling that he was starting to stare, he wrenched his gaze back to the task at hand. Well, the runes for activate, touch, and power are linked together the closest, so I'm guessing that whatever is meant to happen will happen when something touches the runes, he said. Seeing her nod, he continued. The last 2 runes are color and change, so when something touches the runic array, it'll change color. That's brilliantly worked out, Harry, Daphne exclaimed. Although, don't expect all arrays to be that easy to understand. Now, let's power it up and see what happens. Daphne pulled her wand from her pocket and touched the tip of it to the power rune. A soft, golden glow spread out, lighting up each line of the 5 runes before gradually disappearing. Then, reaching across the desk, she pulled a box towards her, reached in and plucked out a small, red rubber ball, which she promptly handed to Harry. Well, test it out, she instructed. After one more look at her, Harry lined up the ball and rolled it across the desk and onto the sandstone. The instant that the red ball touched the array, there was a brief flash as the ball turned green. Wow, Harry laughed. That's amazing. It is, isn't it? Daphne agreed. That's what the ancient Norse wizards once used, while we, today, use a coloring changing spell. Plucking another ball from the box, this one blue, Harry rolled it across the desk after the first, marveling as it, too, changed to the color green. He simply couldn't help but laugh once more. You're laughing now, but you'll be cursing by the end of the year, just like the rest of us, Daphne grinned. What do you mean? Harry asked. The end-of-year assignment for 3rd years is to create 3 basic runic arrays, like this one, that all have different effects in a unique way, Daphne told him. Immediately, Harry's eyes shifted to the sandstone as his mind began to spin with possibilities. The box of balls caught his attention, and it, too, was added into his calculations. Does it have to be made of sandstone? He blurted. Daphne's eyebrows nearly disappeared under her fringe. Not at all. In fact, Professor Babbling prefers that you use a different medium. Harry nodded. Wood, pine preferably for its softness and ease of carving. Perhaps a maze. Anyway, something that he could roll balls through, having them impact the arrays at different places for different things to happen to them. Yes, that definitely had possibilities. Thanks, Daphne. You've just given me the best idea of how to pass ancient runes this year, he beamed. Chapter 15. Awkward Conversations. Disclaimer: I solemnly swear that JKR owns everything Harry Potter. Whether or not I am up to no good with her characters is for you to decide. /0v0 / Sunday, 9 December 1994. The Great Hall, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. As unobtrusively as he could, Harry peeked his head around the door into the Great Hall. As expected for this time on a Sunday morning, the tables were only lightly filled. His eye roamed up and down each of the 4 long tables before coming to rest on the one person that he was dreading to see there. Mission accomplished, Harry retracted his head and leant against the cold stone wall. Really, there was no good reason for the way that he was feeling. He'd been psyching himself up for this moment for the past 2 days. But the way his hands had instantly become clammy at the sight of her, the way his heart had suddenly felt as though it was about to burst out of chest with how fast it was beating, the way that his mouth had instantly gone bone dry, making it impossible to swallow, all told him that he wasn't ready for this. Not that he had much of a choice. Ever since McGonagall and then Neville had talked to him about the Yule Ball, Harry'd found it hard to concentrate on anything else. It was as if the sword of Damocles was hanging over his head, waiting for him to make a decision. Heck knew that he was going to need a date, and the sooner the better. He still had to learn how to dance, after all, and he couldn't doth it until he had a dance partner. The thought of needing a date had led his mind instantly to his 3 tutors, Hermione, Daphne, and Susan. Really, it only made sense for him to ask one of them. They were the ones that he knew best. And according to Neville, Hermione was already off the table before he could even think about considering her. Oh, he could always ask someone else. But really, who was there? He only had 2 classes with other students, and they were both with 3rd years, and when it came down to it, he'd just feel a bit funny asking someone younger than him to be his date. And the girls that he'd met at mealtimes were acquaintances at best. No, if he was going to have to ask someone to the Yule Ball, he at least wanted someone who he knew at least marginally well. That meant either Susan or Daphne. So, for the past couple of days, his mind had been debating which one he'd prefer to ask. The fact that he'd constantly pictured dancing with only one of them in his mind told him which one his subconscious had chosen. And that brought him back to the here and now. Once again, Harry stuck his head around the door. Yep, there she was, sitting at a house table, eating breakfast while reading the paper. The table around her was even clear of others, meaning that when he made a fool of himself, it'd be in relative obscurity. Sucking in a deep breath, he rounded the door and began forcing his feet across the floor towards her. He'd only managed a dozen steps, though, when he was intercepted. A waif of a girl he recognized from his ancient runes and arithmancy classes materialized right in front of him, causing him to come to an abrupt halt. Her long, dirty blonde hair was today wrapped around her head in an elaborate knot, her wand stuck through the middle of it. Her ever-present necklace made of butterbeer corks and radish earrings were in place, as was her overly large silver eyes that were, once again, unnervingly staring at him. "Hello, Harry Potter." Hi, Luna, right," he replied, sneaking a look past her at his quarry. A large smile blossomed on her face. "That's right." She cocked her head as she studied him then. "Are you all right? There seems to be a Raxpert infestation surrounding you." "What?" Harry asked, bewildered. "Never mind, Harry Potter. I'm sure they'll fly off on their own once you do what you came here to do," she told him. "Unfortunately, that may not be now." "What?" Harry asked again, feeling as though this conversation had yet to even start making sense. "I have a message for you," Luna stated. "Okay, what is it?" he asked. "I don't know, silly. I don't read other people's messages," Luna giggled as she handed over a small scroll tied with a purple ribbon. "But I suspect that it'll make your day a lot more interesting than you thought that it would be." Thanks, Harry replied, taking the scroll. Have a good day, Harry Potter, Luna said before skipping off. For an instant, Harry was torn, the scroll or sorting out his date. The answer, of course, was obvious. The scroll was sure to be less nerve-wracking. Harry blinked at the message in his hand. Now what? He wondered. /0v0 / Sunday, 9 December 1994. The headmaster's office, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. His hand was still poised to knock when he heard the headmaster's voice from the other side of the door, bidding him to enter. Pushing open the heavy oak door, Harry stepped in and looked around. Immediately a sense of wariness swept over him. As expected, Headmaster Dumbledore was seated behind his desk. Standing to one side in front of it was Professor McGonagall. Immediately, Harry's mind recalled the conversation that he'd had with Madame Bones as they walked around the lake. One of these two were most likely the one responsible for his name coming out of the Goblet of Fire. For some reason, he simply couldn't see Hagrid being capable of the powerful magic that he'd been told was responsible for confusing the goblet into thinking that there were 4 champions instead of 3. Steeling his resolve, Harry stepped forward. It wouldn't do to give either of them an inkling that he suspected them. It was then that he noted a third adult in the room. This one had been sitting in a high-backed chair in front of the headmaster's desk, but had risen upon his entrance. He turned as Harry approached, and Harry's eyes swept over the unknown man. He was tall, at least. He was taller than Professor McGonagall, and nearly as tall as Headmaster Dumbledore. His black hair hung loosely at the nape of his neck, a stray lock nearly obscuring his grey eyes that were regarding him just as intently in return. The man's clothing exuded richness, everything from the silk-lined black cloak to the white satin shirt to the long black pants and dragon-hide boots. Ah, Mr. Potter, so good of you to come so quickly, Headmaster Dumbledore beamed. Harry simply nodded in reply, wary as to what these 3 could want with him. Mr. Potter, Dumbledore continued, I would like you to meet Mr. Sirius Black, your godfather. Harry's eyes darted to the man beside him. What godfather? He blurted. I don't have a godfather. It would seem that you do, Dumbledore countered, his voice full of mirth. Hi, Harry, the man, Sirius Black, said tentatively. It's nice to see you again. Harry's eyes narrowed. Again. Yeah, I used to come around your mum and dad's place all the time when you were little, Sirius explained. You did? Harry asked flatly. Well, if you did, and if you are, as you claim, my godfather, how come this is the first time that I'm meeting you? Sirius' eyes darted around the room. I made some poor choices the night your mum and dad were killed. Some choices that led to me being put in prison for 12 years, Sirius explained. As soon as Harry'd heard the word prison, he'd started backing away. Godfather or not, and he was still waiting for proof of that claim. This man was a criminal, and he wanted nothing to do with him. Wait, Harry, let me explain, Sirius begged, stepping forward. I was innocent. Go on, Harry said. His eyes narrowed from where he'd paused halfway back to the office door. I don't know how much you've been told about the night your parents were killed, Sirius began. Assume nothing, Harry told him, hoping to get a complete story from the man instead of bits and pieces. Okay, Sirius said, running a hand through his hair. You know about you-know-who, right? At Harry's nod, he continued. Well, we knew that he was after your mum and dad, so your parents went under the Fidelius charm. That's a charm that can hide the location of a place inside a person, a secret keeper. If you haven't been told the secret, then you can walk right past the place and not even know that it's there. Anyway, we told everyone that I would be your parents' secret keeper, seeing as I was your dad's best friend and all, but really, we used a different friend. We hoped to confuse everyone and keep your parents safe that way. What we didn't know was that our friend, Wormtail, was a traitor. He'd already turned and joined you-know-who, Sirius spat. He gave your parents' location to you know, who so that he could kill your parents. Well, that night, I got worried and went to check on Peter, Wormtail, but he wasn't at his place. So I went to your parents. But I was already too late. Your mum and dad had already been killed. I'll admit it, I lost it then. I should have stayed. I should have been the godfather that your parents wanted me to be. But I didn't. I wasn't. All I saw was red. I knew what the traitor had done, and I wanted revenge. Harry stared as the story unfolded, never hearing it quite like this, picturing it in his mind as Sirius related it. I managed to track Wormtail down, Sirius continued, but the rat got one over on me. I had my wand on him and everything, but he yelled out to the crowd that I'd been the one to betray your parents. Then he blasted the street behind him with his wand. Killed 12 muggles before he cut off his finger and changed into the rat that he is. Changed into a rat, Harry repeated. Yeah, Sirius nodded. Yeah, you see, me and your dad and Wormtail were all animagi. We can turn into animals. I'm a big black dog. Your dad was a stag and Wormtail was a rat. Okay, Harry said slowly, amazed at this new type of magic. Anyway, that was when the auras turned up and found me laughing at the absurdity of little Peter getting one over on me. They carted me off and threw me into Azkaban without a trial, Sirius finished. And you only got 12 years for killing 12 people? Harry asked. No, Sirius replied, shaking his head. I was supposed to be there for life, but I broke out. Harry's eyes widened, and he took a further couple of steps away. You're an escapee from wizard prison. I was, but not anymore, Sirius said quickly. Long story short, I found Wormtail, and we had a dual trial back in May. I was found innocent, and Wormtail was executed. So where have you been since then? Harry asked. Hospital, Sirius spat. The healers seemed to think that I needed 6 months of their tender care. But I'm out now. Got out yesterday, in fact. Stopped long enough to get some new clothes and came straight here. You came straight here. Why? Harry asked. Well, you're my godson, Sirius said, as if that explained everything. And? Harry asked. Again, Sirius ran his hands through his hair. I guess I didn't think about it too far. I guess it's a bit much for you, isn't it? A stranger turning up, claiming to be your godfather when you don't know him from Merlin. Harry nodded jerkily. What is it you want from me, Mr. Black? Harry asked. Please call me Sirius. And I guess all I really want is a chance to get to know you and for you to get to know me. Do you think that could we do that? Harry stared into the hopeful look on the man's face. His eyes flicked to Dumbledore and McGonagall, both of whom were doing a lousy job of pretending that they hadn't been hanging on every word said. Finally, he sighed. I guess that we could give it a try. A massive smile erupted on Sirius' face. That's great, Harry. Would you like to perhaps go somewhere and talk? I haven't had breakfast yet, Harry said, his mind still trying to process the fact that he was supposed to have some sort of relationship with the stranger standing in front of him. Being as it is a Sunday, Dumbledore interrupted, breakfast will still be served in the Great Hall for another half an hour. Would you like to accompany me to breakfast? Harry asked. I'd love to, Harry, Sirius replied. /0v0 / Sunday, 9 December 1994. Third floor corridor, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The two of them, man and boy, slowly walked the corridors of the castle. They'd been together since leaving the headmaster's office, supposedly getting to know one another. Breakfast had been a tense affair, full of long silences filled with large plates of eggs, bacon, sausage, toast, and juice. Occasionally, one or the other would burst out with a random question for the other to answer. What's your favorite subject? Did you have a job before? Can you fly? Your dad was an excellent flyer. Do you have a broom? Do you have any family? I read in the Prophet that you had to face a dragon. I've never seen one. What are they like? Each question was dutifully answered, even if those answers were rather succinct. And then would come the next period of silence as both sought what else they could say to the relative stranger seated across from them. Finally, breakfast was finished, and in a fit of something to say, Harry had blurted out an invitation for Sirius to come back to his quarters. "You look just like your dad. Except for your eyes, of course. They're all lilies," Sirius stated. Harry looked sidewards at Sirius, with a forced half-smile on his face. "You knew my parents," he said. "Well, if they made you my godfather, that's pretty obvious. I meant, I don't know anything really about my parents. Perhaps you could tell me a bit about them." Sirius' face lit up with a huge smile, and his eyes unfocused slightly as his mind delved into the past. "Well, I met your dad properly on the Hogwarts Express in first year. Oh, I knew of him well before that. We were both from old pureblood families. After all, it was just that our families didn't really mix that much," Sirius began. "So yeah, we met on the Hogwarts Express, him and me and Remus and Peter. The four of us became friends on that trip, and when we all got sorted in Gryffindor, well, we became as thick as thieves. Your mum was sorted into Gryffindor with us too, but we were 11-year-old boys then, and girls didn't really figure into our lives too much. Well, apart from James. It was different with him. The instant that he laid eyes on your mother, he was smitten. He pursued her for the next 6 years before Lily finally gave in. They dated all through 7th year and were married soon after graduating. And then, a little over a year later, you came along." "Sir Roderick," Sirius exclaimed, cutting short his story. The old magical suit of armor, shield on one arm, wand clutched in his other hand, turned slightly at the sound of his name and bowed slightly. He pivoted slightly then to face Harry, and his visor tilted expectantly. "Rowan," Harry said sotto voce. Instantly, Sir Roderick stepped to the side, revealing the door that led to Harry's quarters. "So, they've got you in old Sir Roderick's room, eh?" Sirius said as they walked in. "You know, I expected to find you in Gryffindor Tower. They wanted to sort me, but I didn't want to take anything away from Cedric. He's the Hogwarts champion. And having 2 champions from the one school would have caused way too many problems," Harry explained. "Yeah, it probably would have," Sirius mused. "Well thought out and very noble. So who are you representing then?" "My old high school, Stonewall," Harry explained. "I know that it's a non-magical school, but it's made things a lot easier." Sirius nodded as he wandered around the main room, taking it all in. His eyes lingered on the partly filled bookshelf between the 2 closed doors for a moment or two before he moved on. He came to an abrupt halt, though, when he came face to face with the easel and painting set up near the window. "Wow, is that?" he breathed. "Yep, that's Ramaranth, the Hungarian horntail that I talked to in the first task," Harry exclaimed. "And you painted that?" Sirius asked, his eyes still glued to the painting. "Yeah, I finished it before breakfast yesterday. I'm hoping to animate it with a special potion and spell. I'm pretty sure that I've followed all of the steps right, and I put the final coat of potion on it yesterday morning. It needs 24 hours to dry before the spell can be applied," Harry explained before looking at his watch, "which should be in about another half hour or so." "I can help you with the spell if you like," Sirius offered. "I mean, I know that you haven't had much magical training yet, but I wouldn't like to intrude or anything." Harry stared at his godfather, a wide smile nearly splitting his face in two. "That'd be brilliant. Thanks. I hadn't worked out who I should ask about that yet." The two grinned at each other for a few minutes then. "Would you like to see my workshop?" Harry asked. "Workshop?" Sirius asked. Harry simply waved his arm in a gesture for the man to follow him. After entering his bedroom, Harry knelt in front of his ebony and silver trunk at the foot of his bed. Flipping the clasp, he touched the 3rd rune and flung open the lid in what had become a very familiar routine. Then, after a grin at his godfather, Harry led the way down the stairs into his trunk. Stepping to the side at the bottom, he turned to watch his godfather's reaction. Sirius, jaw dropped as he took in the room, from the huge workbench in the middle of the floor to the shelves of wood, the cupboards, the tools mounted on the walls, and his rowan desk on the far side. "What is all this?" Sirius asked. "My workshop," Harry replied simply. "I'm good with my hands, especially at building things." "You make things out of wood?" Sirius asked, as he lightly ran his hands across the different woods on the shelves as he wandered past them. "Yeah, I learnt it back in Surrey. Uncle Vernon forced me to get a job. Thankfully, it was one that I loved, and the guys who ran the place ran interference for me, teaching me the work and giving me a safe place to be while at the same time pretending to my uncle that they were working my butt off as nastily as they could," Harry explained. "They gave me all of this as a going-away present." "All of this?" Sirius asked, his eyes now fixated on the exquisite desk. "Well, not the trunk, obviously. They're non-magical and the trunk's clearly magical. And not the desk so much. I made that myself," Harry replied. Sirius' eyes darted from the desk to Harry and back again. "You made this?" he asked, disbelief warring with awe clear in his voice. "By yourself, out of wood with your hands?" "Yeah," Harry replied nervously, quickly becoming self-conscious. That's amazing. I've never met anyone who could do that," Sirius exclaimed. "Wizards tend to just transfigure stuff, but I doubt anyone could magic something as amazing as this." "Thanks," Harry said. "It's hands down the best thing that I've ever made." Sirius stared at Harry, as though seeing him for the first time. "I don't know where you get it all from, Harry, but it sure wasn't your dad. If it wasn't for a prank, he didn't have an artistic bone in his body. Lily doodled at lot on all of her books, so maybe you got it from her." "Pranks?" Harry asked, intrigued. "Yeah, when the four of us were in school, we were notorious for our pranks. Reckon we were the biggest pranksters in the history of Hogwarts," Sirius grinned. "Called ourselves the Marauders, we did." Harry's eyes bulged. "Marauders, come with me." Without waiting for a response, Harry dashed up the stairs and back into the main room before pulling one of the journals from the bookshelf. He whirled around and thrust his father's journal at his godfather. "Do you know how to read this?" he asked excitedly. Sirius stared at the journal in his hands, a look of wonder on his face. "Where'd you find this?" he asked. "In my family vault," Harry waved off. "Can you tell me how to read this?" In reply, Sirius pulled out his wand and tapped it to the cover of the thick book. "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good," Sirius intoned. Instantly, the gibberish on the front cover blurred and morphed into words that Harry could finally read: A Prankster's Guide, The Marauder's Handbook, and underneath were the authors' names: Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs. The second that Sirius put his wand away, he pulled off the thick band from the book and began flipping through it. Harry could see that all of the writing was now in English, not to mention that the blank pages had been revealed and the pages that were stuck together were now accessible. "There you go, Prongslit, enjoy, and make sure you put it to good use," Sirius said, handing the handbook over. "Prongslit?" Harry asked, looking up at him. "Remember how I told you that we could all become animagi, turn into animals?" Sirius asked. "Well, we all had special names as well. I'm Padfoot, and your dad, being a stag, was Prongs, which makes you Prongslit, at least until you learn how to become an animagus as well, and you get your own name." "I could learn how to turn into an animal?" Harry asked in disbelief. "Sure, the instructions are all in there. But I've got to warn you, it's a long, hard process. It took us the better part of 3 years to work out," Sirius replied. "Oh, and before I forget, to encrypt the pages again, simply tap the book with your wand and say, 'Mischief managed.'" Harry simply nodded in reply, his eyes back on the handbook that he was leafing through. As he turned a page, his hands on his watch caught his attention, and he realized what time it was. "Would you still be interested in performing that animation spell on Ramaranth's picture for me?" Harry asked. "Not a problem, Harry," Sirius smiled. I assume you know the spell. Putting the handbook back on the shelf, Harry plucked a different book up. A quick flick through it brought him to the page that he needed. Taking the book, Sirius read through it and muttered to himself, his wand hand practicing the movements that he'd need. Finally, he nodded to Harry. The two of them moved across the room to stand in front of the painting. Harry's eyes roved over his work. In the very center stood Ramaranth, her black and bronze body curled protectively over her clutch of eggs, her wings half furled, and her swirling yellow eyes seeming to stare out of the painting, even in her non-animate state. Around her, Harry had painted the rock and sand arena, conveniently leaving out any sign of the stands of people watching the tournament. The painting itself had been framed by an ebony frame that he'd made especially for it. Ex pictura ad vitam, animatum, Sirius intoned, his wand moving in ever-increasingly intricate patterns. From the point that Sirius tapped his wand on the painting to finish, a brilliant white light spread outwards in a fast-moving circle. Harry held his breath in anxious anticipation, hoping against hope that he'd followed all of the steps properly. Finally, after what seemed an age, the swirling yellow eye of Ramarath blinked. A relieved laugh escaped him as he watched the painted horntail shake her wings, blink again, and stretch before quickly curling her neck around to touch each of her eggs lightly with her nose. Section Ramaranth section, Harry asked. The horntail's neck whipped back around, and her eyes swirled as she took in the two humans staring at her. Her eyes focused in on Harry first, before switching to examine Sirius, and then coming back to rest upon Harry once more. Section Speaker, it is agreeable to see you again, Section, the dragon said. Section you too, Ramaranth. I was hoping that this would work, Section, Harry grinned. Ramaranth's head swiveled from side to take in the edges of her painting. Section I am in one of those pictures that you told me of. Speaker, Section, she asked. Section, that's right, Section, Harry replied. Section, I've finally finished painting it, and we've put the consciousness of the real Ramaranth that I met into it using magic, Section, Harry explained. Ramaranth seemed to think about this for a time before she settled on the ground close to her eggs, appearing to be more relaxed. Section, it will be pleasing to have someone to speak to whenever I wish. Speaker, Section, Ramaranth declared. Harry breathed a sigh of relief, not having been looking forward to annoying even a painting of the great dragon. Chapter 16. The Hope of the Wizarding World. Disclaimer, I solemnly swear that JKR owns everything Harry Potter. Whether or not I am up to no good with her characters is for you to decide. /0v0 / Tuesday, 11 December 1994. Charms Corridor, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Movement from the corner of her eye distracted Daphne just enough to have her pause after leaving the Charms classroom. Beside her, her best friend Tracy gave her a queer look, obviously trying to work out what had caught her attention. Slowly, she turned her head, searching for what she had noticed, and then she saw him. Lurking in the doorway of the classroom 2 doors down was Harry Potter. He was shuffling his feet slightly even as he craned his head about, watching as the various Slytherins and Hufflepuffs left class. Instantly, she knew what this was about. She'd noticed him the last couple of days, often nearby looking incredibly nervous about something. The first time had been Sunday at breakfast. Twice his head had poked in the door before quickly withdrawing, and then, when it finally looked as though whatever he had on his mind had been decided, he'd been intercepted by the odd little Ravenclaw and whisked away. Determinedly repressing the smile that threatened to appear, Daphne indicated the lurking boy to Tracy, who, for her part, grinned widely before immediately turning and striding the other direction. Deciding to take pity on the poor boy, she turned to her left and began walking down the corridor. "Daphne," Harry called at her approach, an uncertain smile on his lips. "Hello, Harry," she replied. Do you have a couple of minutes to talk? In private?" he asked. She'd been asked out more than a dozen times this year alone, not to mention the 3 invites that she'd already declined for the Yule Ball, so she was in half a mind to refuse his request to make him wait just a bit longer. But this was Harry. His confidence wasn't as high as he often made out. She'd seen the small, uncertain boy that he kept hidden behind his emotive green eyes. "Of course, Harry. I have the rest of the afternoon off," she told him. She waited then, one eyebrow raised. Finally, he got the hint and opened the door for her. As she entered the room, her back to the nervous boy, she allowed herself a smile. He showed promise. This was one of those rooms that was used only sparingly, which meant that, while there were desks and chairs set up, they were slightly dusty. A quick Scargifer cleaned the closest chair, and she sat primly. Harry, for his part, perched on the edge of a nearby desk before promptly jumping up again and settling into its chair. His leg, she noticed, was bouncing slightly. "Daphne," he began what she recognized as a well-practiced speech, "I was wondering if you would accompany me to the Yule Ball as my date." She was surprised. Not only did he manage to get it all out in one go without stammering, but it was actually coherent and at an appropriate speed and volume. "Before you answer," he continued, this time slightly more rushed, even as his cheeks reddened, "being a champion means that I have to open the ball with the champion's dance. I think it's a waltz or something." When the ball had first been announced, Daphne's very first thought, before she'd had a chance to clamp it down and bury it away, was to wish to go with Harry. Over the past month, during their tutoring sessions and mealtimes, she'd gotten to know the savior of the wizarding world and found herself intrigued. And not just intrigued, but a little attracted. It didn't help that he was unobtrusively charming, as the gift of the unicorn scene that he'd drawn as a recompense for standing up their tutoring session had shown. Not to mention that, as Tracy said more than once, he's for easy on the eye. That's why, even though she'd already had multiple offers for dates to the ball, she turned them all down, hoping that the one who she'd most like to go with would ask her. And really, she was leagues above the competition. Harry was always going to ask someone that he knew. That meant that it'd either be her, Susan, or Hermione. Hermione, she knew, already had a date, and Daphne knew that she'd spent a lot more time with Harry than Susan had. The light sheen of sweat that appeared on Harry's brow, not to mention the increased bounce rate of his leg, told Daphne that she'd taken far too long to answer the poor boy. His mouth was just starting to open, most likely in an effort to withdraw the offer, when she beat him to the draw. "I'd love to go with you, Harry." "Brilliant," Harry exclaimed, a massive grin on his face. "I take it you know how to dance, don't you?" she asked. "Ah, not yet," Harry admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "But Professor McGonagall has offered to give me lessons. That's if you're willing to help me." "Let me know where and when," she agreed. /0v0 / Saturday, 15 December 1994. The Three Broomsticks, Hogsmeade. Even after living in a magic school inside a massive castle for close to 6 weeks, it was this that really sold Harry on the fact that he was now in a completely different world, a world of magic. Currently, he, along with his godfather Sirius, Neville, Susan, Hannah Abbott, Hermione, Tracy Davis, and Daphne were squeezed around a table in the back of the popular pub/dining establishment in the only all-wizarding town in Great Britain. Around them were dozens of people, both from the school and the village, and for all Harry knew, the wider magical community as well. Overhead, paper planes that had been charmed to pass messages from one group to another flittered their way across the room. This was made all the more difficult by the fact that they were currently having to dodge a stream of sparkling fireworks that the Weasley twins had let off. The owner, Madame Rosmutter, was currently in the process of telling off the 2 redheads. Her wand was flicking about, the tip of it glowing an ominous orange as she used it to emphasize her point. Another obstacle for those paper planes was a continuous stream of ever-increasing purple smoke rings that the ugliest woman, witch that Harry had ever seen was blowing out of her pipe. He was sure that the story books that he'd read when he was holed up in the library as a child would call her a hag, but there was no way that he'd dare to do so to her face. And then there were the three men in the corner, the hoods of their deep black robes pulled up over their heads, only the tips of their greenish noses poking out whenever they took a sip from their drinks. The fact that those drinks were spitting and sparking a revolting murky yellow, something, didn't seem to bother them in the slightest. Dragging his attention back to the table that he was sitting around, Harry closed his hand around the large earthenware mug in front of him. Instantly, the warmth of the liquid inside seeped through the pottery and warmed his hands wonderfully. It was the strangest drink that Harry'd ever had, and oddly addicting. Butterbeer it was called, which he though was appropriate considering that it tasted like a hot butterscotch mixed with something chocolatey. I'm telling you, I got the fright of my life when he started spitting and hissing at the painting, Sirius was saying. And what was worse was when the painting started hissing back at him. Around him, his friends all burst out laughing, causing Harry to give a weak grin. What can I say? Parselmouth, remember, he said. Oh, stop that, Sirius said, reaching past Daphne to smack him on the back of the head. What I tell you last week? Yeah, I know. It's the same thing these guys have been saying, Harry replied, waving idly at the others around the table. Parseltongue is just another language, simply for snakes instead of humans. Exactly, Sirius beamed. And I can think of a whole bunch who'd love to have the ability, even if they'd never come out and say it. Most of my family, for a start. Hey, I wonder if that's where you got it from. What? Harry asked, confused. I wonder if you got the skill from the blacks. Your grandmother, Doria, was a black before she married your grandfather, Charles. And blacks have had a tendency over the centuries to pick up the most interesting of skills. My second cousin, Tonks, is a metamorph magus, which tends to crop up in the family every couple of generations, Sirius explained. Oh, I've read about that, Hermione exclaimed. Metamorph magi can change their appearance simply by thinking about it. That's right, Sirius said. In fact, from what my cousin Andromeda, that's Tonks, mum, said, I don't think that anyone really knows what Tonks would look like without her ability anymore. It'd be nice if Parseltongue was as accepted as that sounds, Harry groused. I told you, Harry, give it time. People will get over it, Daphne said, bumping him with her shoulder. Just think of all of those job offers that you got from the Dragon Reserves, Susan agreed. None of them had a problem with you being able to speak Parseltongue. Besides, you're the boy who lived, Neville shrugged. People are always going to be talking about what you can or can't do. You're going to need to get over the title, Harry, Daphne said, noticing the face that he pulled at the mention of his title. I know, he sighed, but ever since I heard that title and how I got it, I simply haven't been able to help thinking about what it means. I get it, Harry, Sirius said. It sucks that James and Lily died. But you didn't. You lived when you shouldn't have. That's a good thing. And not only that, you stopped a Dark Lord and ended his reign of terror. Everyone is always going to see you for what that means. You gave us all hope again. He's right, Harry, Neville nodded. My gran has told me heaps about what it was like when you know who was alive, and everything she's told me was horrible. The fact that you spent so long away from the magical world probably hasn't helped at all, Hermione commented. And now that you've come back, I think everyone simply wants to thank you for what you did for them, for the hope and peace that you becoming the boy who lived brought. I tell you, we could have used some of that hope the last few years, Hannah said. The other teens around the table nodded solemnly at whatever memories Hannah's comment had evoked. What do you mean? Harry asked, a sentiment that he could see by the look on that serious face that he echoed. Let's just say that our schooling these last few years has been anything but uneventful, Daphne stated. Harry cocked an eyebrow over his mug, waiting for his friends to elaborate. Well, I suppose that we should start with first year, said Hermione. That was probably the least eventful. If you don't count the death of a teacher as eventful, Susan snorted. A teacher died, Harry gasped. Susan nodded. Professor Quirrell. He taught defense against the dark arts. It happened at Halloween. From what little Auntie said, they never could work out how he died. I remember that he came running into the hall during the feast, claiming that there was a troll in the dungeons before he fainted, Hannah picked up. Then, sometime after we were all sent to our common rooms. Yeah, half our house wanted to kill Dumbledore for that, Daphne said darkly. Harry stared at her for a few seconds before it clicked. The Slytherin common room is in the dungeons. Daphne nodded before gesturing for Hannah to continue. The next thing everyone knew was that Quirrell had been found dead up on the 3rd floor without a mark on him. We had an Auror fill in as teacher for the rest of that year, Neville added, but it was still pretty scary knowing that whatever had killed Quirrell was still out there. I wonder if it was the basilisk, Hermione mused. Basilisk, Sirius blurted, his eyes bulging. Yes, well, that's what happened second year, Hermione said. What's a basilisk? Harry asked. A giant snake, like 50 or 60 feet long, that can kill you simply by you looking into its eyes, Sirius said gravely. And you had one of these in the castle. Hermione nodded. It petrified half a dozen students, and then Ron's little sister, Ginny, was taken. They evacuated the school for 6 weeks after that. Aurors scoured the school, Susan said, taking up the story. They found it in the end and killed it, though it killed 14 Aurors before they could do so. And then there was apparently some strange man there as well, helping the basilisk. From what I heard, they never did identify who he was, even after they killed him. What about Ron's sister? Harry asked. They never found her, Tracy whispered, alive or dead. 3rd year was the Dementors, Neville shuddered after the silence stretched out too long. Dementors? Harry asked. Yeah, sorry about that, Sirius said to the others before turning to Harry to explain. They're the main guards at Azkaban. Demons, really. They literally eat any happy thought or feeling, and their worst weapon is being able to suck out your very soul. Nasty, Harry commented for something to say. You've got no idea, Daphne said. I don't think anyone in the castle smiled at all that year. They may have been stationed around the outside of the grounds, but when there's over 100 of them, their influence was felt in the very castle itself. Why were they here? Harry asked. That was my fault, Sirius confessed. After I found out that Pettigrew was hiding in the castle, I kept muttering in my sleep, "He's at Hogwarts." The guards thought that I meant you, thinking that I didn't know that you weren't there. Either way, it didn't matter. They knew where I was going after I escaped, and they planned accordingly. Thankfully, they were sent back to Azkaban after you turned yourself in, Susan said. And now there's the TriWizard tournament where weird things are happening again, Hermione said. A three-school competition where for names get chosen to compete. That, of course, brings you back into the wizarding world, Harry, and everyone wants to find out everything that they can about you and fawn all over you. It doesn't help with the weird things that you can do either, Neville added. Then, seeing the look that Harry gave him, elaborated. Your wandless magic, painting, talking to dragons. I think I see what you're saying, Harry said slowly. Somehow I killed Voldemort, changing the world from the depths of war to peace in a night, and then I disappeared. And while I've been gone, even more weird things have gone on, and the fact that I can do even more weird stuff, at least according to the wizarding world, I'm destined to be gawked at and talked about until they get over me coming back. That'll probably take most of your lifetime, Sirius grinned. You're a hero, Harry, whether you like it or not, and you mean a lot to a lot of people. Best to just accept it and move on. Harry nodded slowly, before looking askance at the girl sitting beside him. You still sure that you want to go to the ball with me? You know that everyone's going to be looking at you just because you're with me, he asked. I understood that, Harry, even before you asked, Daphne replied, and I can assure you that my answer isn't going to change. /0v0 / Monday, 17 December 1994. Transfiguration Classroom, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Come in, Mr. Potter, Miss Greengrass, Professor McGonagall insisted. There's no need to loiter in my door. At her urging, Harry led his partner into the Transfiguration Classroom. Professor McGonagall, he could see, was in the far corner, bent over an incredibly old gramophone. Harry stared at it. They were going to be learning to dance using that. Just how old were these dances, he wondered. Straightening, Professor McGonagall eyed the two of them, and then at her classroom, a frown forming on her lips. No, this simply will not do, she stated. Then, with a simple wave of her wand, all of the desks and chairs flew through the air, arranging themselves in orderly stacks against the wall. The floor of the classroom was now clear of all obstacles, a space that Harry stared at dubiously. Now, the champion's dance is primarily a waltz, Professor McGonagall was saying, drawing Harry's attention back to her. However, I see no reason why we should limit ourselves to the one dance, do you? Not at all, Professor, Daphne replied. In fact, the more dances that we can teach Harry, the more fun the night will most likely be. I take it that you know the dances, Professor McGonagall asked. I was raised in the old ways, Daphne stated primly. Well, that should make our job much easier, Professor McGonagall noted. Mr. Potter, the waltz that we will be learning is danced in a simple 3/4 time, using a closed position and a simple box step. Observe. Then, to Harry's great surprise, Professor McGonagall stepped up to Daphne, placed one hand on her waist, clasped her other hand in her own, and the two began to move about the room. He tried to concentrate on their feet. He really did. But the idea of a teacher, and a female one at that, dancing with a female student, meant that his attention wavered somewhat. Very well, Mr. Potter, Professor McGonagall said as the dance came to a close and the two separated. Your turn. While Professor McGonagall quick-stepped across the room to the gramophone, Harry hesitantly moved closer to Daphne. Put your right hand on my waist and hold your left hand up for me to hold, Daphne instructed. The left hand part he could handle, but the right hand part, that was a bit more difficult. He had to touch Daphne's waist. Do it, Harry, Daphne insisted. I'm not going to bite. I may just hex your bits off, though, if you make a fool of me by not learning this. His right hand moved instinctively to rest oh so ever gently on her waist. Immediately, the cuff of his robe slipped down, threatening to get in his way. With a frown, Harry stepped back. Harry, Daphne said warningly. Just a second, Daphne, Harry said, as he shrugged out of the dark green robe, leaving him in just his grey pants, white shirt, and stone grey and green tie. After throwing it across the professor's desk, he sucked in a deep breath and strode back to Daphne. Then, before he could think about it, he placed his right hand more fully on her waist and grasped her right hand with his left. All of a sudden his boldness fled, and he looked up tentatively into her shining blue eyes. That's much better, she whispered with a smile. Are we ready? Professor McGonagall asked. Oh, just a minute. From across the room, she twirled her wand in an intricate pattern before finishing with pointing at their feet. There you are, Miss Greengrass. That should protect your feet from unwanted hoofs. Now, on the count of 3, she said, starting the music. Chapter 17, Formal Fashion Fiasco. Disclaimer, I solemnly swear that JKR owns everything Harry Potter. Whether or not I am up to no good with her characters is for you to decide. /0v0 / Wednesday, 21 December 1994. Classroom on the first floor, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry, Susan yelled, freeze it quickly. Drawing his wand, Harry attempted to get a bead on the bird zipping around the rafters of the classroom. The thing was fast, damned fast. Instead of his hand moving smoothly as he tracked it, he found that he needed to jerk his wand from one side to the other, attempting to follow its movements. Suddenly, the lime green and orange ball of fluff spun about on its axis and shot towards the door. Luckily, Susan was there before it, firmly slamming the door in its face. It was just the opportunity that Harry needed. The door brought it up short, pausing it in its flight. "Immobulus!" he cried, causing a bright blue beam of light to shoot from his wand to strike the bird square on. "Well done, Harry," Susan panted. "Hold it there." With a nod, Harry kept his wand trained on the bird, ensuring that it remained frozen in midair. This charm that froze living creatures that Professor Flitwick had taught him was prone to allowing gravity or momentum affect the creature that had been immobilized. Thus, he'd been taught that it was imperative that he keep focused, lest the bird, in this case, plummet to the floor. Within seconds, Susan was back with the cage in her hands. Carefully, she plucked the bird out of the air before stuffing it back inside the cage and firmly locking the door. "I think that we'd better observe the F-whooper from inside its cage," she commented dryly. Harry agreed, giving her a nod combined with a lopsided grin. "Well, there you go, Harry," Susan said, placing the cage onto the nearest table. "I'm supposed to be teaching you care of magical creatures, and I've already learnt something tonight. F-whoopers are incredibly fast." "I would have thought that it would have made some sort of noise when it slammed headfirst into that door," Harry commented. "Silencing charm," Susan replied. "By law, all F-whoopers in captivity have to have a silencing charm applied to them monthly." Harry cocked his head at her. "Why's that?" "Because if you hear their call, it can drive you insane," Susan replied simply. "Good law," Harry said. Susan grinned at him. "Don't tell my auntie this, but I think that it's actually one of the few laws that actually make sense." "My lips are sealed," Harry replied, pulling an imaginary zip across his mouth. "Right then, F-whoopers," Susan said, gesturing to the birds sitting on the cage, staring menacingly at the pair of them. "They're a native of Africa and classed as a XXX beast, so not too dangerous, since all it takes to ensure that you're safe is knowing how to perform a silencing charm." "A fourth-year charm?" Harry asked. "Fifth year," Susan corrected. "Is there anything else special about them, apart from their ability to send people insane?" Harry asked. "Not really," Susan replied. "Their feathers make good quills, and their eggs are incredibly pretty. I guess that's about it, really. They're easy to identify, though, which is something. I don't know of any other birds that come in bright pink, lime green, orange, and yellow feathers like they do." Harry nodded absently as he jotted notes in his notebook about the magical bird. "If they're from Africa, then it's not likely that I'll come across them all that often," Harry said. "No, but seeing as Hagrid managed to borrow this one from a friend of his, it gave us a chance to see one up close," Susan replied. From the corner of his eye, Harry noticed Susan sidling up to look over his shoulder at the sketch that Harry was doing of the F-whooper. "I know that I've told you this before, but you're a really good artist," Susan commented. "Thanks," Harry replied. Shifting his eyes slightly, he watched as Susan's eyes darted from his notebook to the F-whooper and back again, a slightly wistful look on her face. He'd seen that look before on other faces. "Would you like me to do you a picture of the F-whooper?" he offered. Immediately, Susan's whole face lit up. "You do that for me." With a nod, Harry bent to his ever-present book bag, where he pulled out his sketch pad and some pastels. "Thank you, Harry," Susan beamed. "I've seen the one that you gave Daphne, and it was amazing." Harry simply gave a small smile. Particularly since his magical painting of Ramaranth had been finished, he'd been finding more and more people interested in his art skills. "So, you and Daphne, huh?" Susan said unexpectedly. Harry blinked at her. "Me and Daphne, what?" "You asked her to the ball," Susan said. "Yeah," Harry agreed slowly. "So do you like her?" Susan asked. Harry stared at the redhead. He never would have pegged her for the gossipy girl type. "We're friends," he replied succinctly. "And?" Susan prompted. "And nothing," Harry replied before sighing. He'd known that he and Daphne going to the ball together was going to have people talking. He just hoped that his friends wouldn't be part of that crowd. "We've only known each other for 6 weeks," Harry said. "We're going as friends, nothing more." Instantly, Susan's demeanor changed. "I'm glad, Harry, and I'm sorry about that. I just thought that you could do with some testing for when some of the other girls, like Lavender and Parvati, begin questioning you." Harry's eyes narrowed as he considered her tactic. Finally, he gave a single nod. "One piece of advice, Harry, and then I'll shut up about it," Susan said. At his raised eyebrows, she continued. "Daphne comes from a family steeped in the old ways, so etiquette and manners are very important. Treat her right." "I will," he promised. /0v0 / Friday, 23 December 1994. Transfiguration Classroom, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The music echoing around the classroom ended, and Harry brought Daphne to a bit of a jerky halt. He was breathing hard, and he was sure that his feet were going to be killing him later. Perhaps he could get one of the elves to give him a bucket of something so that he could soak them. "Much better, Mr. Potter," Professor McGonagall said, breaking into his thoughts. "Yes, Harry, you didn't step on my feet nearly as much that time," Daphne said dryly. "Sorry," Harry mumbled then. "I don't know about this foxtrot thing. It may look a bit like the waltz, but it sure doesn't feel like it." "I know that the tempo is quicker, but you are coming along nicely," Professor McGonagall told him. "Your waltz is adequate, and if we can squeeze in 1 or 2 more practices before the ball, then your foxtrot will also pass muster." "It's a shame that we don't have time to learn a couple of the others," Daphne sighed. "Assuming that the charm that Professor McGonagall placed on my feet held, I'd be interested in seeing how you do with the tango or the quick-step." "Perhaps if Mr. Potter had asked you earlier, we might have had the time to at least try them," Professor McGonagall stated. "2's enough, isn't it?" Harry cut in. "2 will be the bare minimum," Daphne told him. "That won't get you out of dancing to some of the more modern songs. Just remember, I expect you to make sure that I have a good time." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Harry replied quickly. "At least we can all be assured that when every eye is on the pair of you, that you won't make a fool of yourselves," Professor McGonagall said. "Speaking of which," Daphne said, before walking across the room to where she dropped her bag when they'd first arrived. Within a minute, she was back and handing Harry a swatch of cloth. Harry looked curiously at the small sample of midnight blue silk. Looking up at her, he raised his eyebrows in question. "That, Harry, is a sample of the fabric of the dress that I'll be wearing for the ball," Daphne explained. "I expect your dress robes to complement it accordingly." "Neville and I are heading into Hogsmeade tomorrow," Harry told her. "I'll make sure I take it with me." "Excellent," Professor McGonagall broke in. "Now, I think that the 2 of you have had enough of a break, so shall we try the foxtrot once more?" Without waiting for an answer, she strode across the room towards the gramophone. Without prompting, Harry lifted his left hand and slid his right hand around Daphne to rest on the middle of her back. He wasn't sure that he'd ever get used to holding her this close, but he had to admit, at least to himself, that he was quickly coming to like it. /0v0 / Saturday, 24 December 1994. Gladrag's Wizardwear, Hogsmeade. Harry looked up at the ancient-looking store dubiously. This's where he was expected to buy his fancy clothes for the Yule Ball. From what he'd been told, the Yule Ball was the event of the year, probably of the decade for he and his peers, and they were all expected to be wearing incredibly formal clothes. But this place, Gladrag's Wizardwear, only looked as though it stocked casual wear for the incredibly out-of-date magical population. "Come on, Harry," Neville said, reaching back to grab a fistful of Harry's jumper and pulling him forward. "They keep dress robes and formal wear on the second level." Obediently, Harry followed his friend through the maze of racks and stands of robes, jumpers, brightly colored socks, and pointed hats towards the circular stairs in the back corner. They were only 4 rungs from the second level when they hit the line. It seemed that, even after Neville making him bolt his breakfast so that they could get the first round of carriages taking students to Hogsmeade, that they still hadn't quite beaten the crowds. As Harry waited behind his friend, his hand slipped into his pocket for the umpteenth time to feel the smooth piece of silk that Daphne had given him. "Now, what would you like, dear?" Harry heard one of the sales witches ask someone ahead of him. Shifting up onto his toes, he peered around the heads in front, trying to see what was ahead of him. From what he could see, there were 3 witches stationed about the room. 2 of them seemed to be dedicated to girls, the other for the boys. Each customer was standing on a little raised platform beside a curtained-off changing room. Measuring tapes flitted about by themselves, measuring every part of the customer that they could, while a quill seemed to be charmed to write down the measurement. Harry's head swiveled from side to side as he tried to get a look at the dresses, suits and tuxedos that he expected to be on offer. But while there were dozens of racks all around the room, every single one of them seemed filled with dresses. Frowning, he stepped slightly out of line, his head swiveling even more wildly from side to side. "Hey, Nev, where's the tuxedos?" he asked. "Tuxedos?" Neville asked, confusion written all over his face. "What's that?" Now it was Harry's turn to stare confusedly at Neville. "You know, Neville, tuxedo. What guys wear to fancy balls," Harry tried to explain. "Oh, you mean dress robes," Neville said. "They're over there." Harry's eyes followed Neville's pointing arm, and then they narrowed. The only thing that Harry could see were racks and racks of what looked like girls' dresses, and then it dawned on him. Dress robes. Dress robes. Robes, as in what he wore over his school clothes to fit in. Taking a closer look, Harry examined the racks again. Yes, these were a lot like those robes, only a lot fancier, and instead of having the option of leaving them open like a weird-looking trench coat, the serobes had the front of them made so that they couldn't open. Thus, his mistake in thinking that they were dresses. But then, they were Echeledris robes. Harry quickly scanned rack after rack. Yes, every single one of them were filled with robes that, while being different colors and different styles and different highlights, were all basically the same. "Ah, Nev, do all dress robes look like that?" he asked tentatively. "I mean, are there some that look more like what we wear with our uniforms?" "These are dress robes, Harry," Neville replied, sounding somewhat confused. "All dress robes are basically the same." Harry stared at him. He was expected to wear a dress to a formal ball. No, there was no way that was going to happen. "I'll catch up with you later, Nev," Harry said, wheeling about. "Harry," Neville called, as Harry descended the stairs. /0v0 / Saturday, 24 December 1994. The Leaky Cauldron, London. Harry stepped from the flue into the dark, Dinglacky cauldron. At this time of the day, the pub was only lightly occupied, meaning that his appearance was barely noticed. Whirling about, Harry headed for the door, brushing the soot from his hair and shoulders as he did so. Leaving the pub, Harry looked up and down the street. Charing Cross Road looked a lot different from the small town road that he'd just left in Hogsmeade. For one thing, here the streets, cars and shops were clear of snow, unlike the blanket of snow that covered the little wizarding village. Another difference was the number of people about. While Hogsmeade was busy, it was only busy in terms of the size of the town. If the same number of people were dropped into Charing Cross Road, they'd barely make a dent in the crowds. Picking a direction at random, Harry set off down the road, his head swiveling backwards and forwards as he looked for a likely-looking store. It took nearly 20 minutes of walking, but finally he found exactly what he was looking for, at least if the dummy in the window was anything to go by. A small tinkling bell sounded as he opened the polished wooden door and stepped inside. This, he sighed, is more like it. The store was entirely dedicated to menswear. Shirts, pants, jackets, vests, and shoes lined the walls, shelves, and racks. Dotted here and there were dummies wearing the latest fashion, be it casual slacks, long-sleeve shirts and jumpers, or business suits or more formal wear. Identifying the section that he wanted, Harry began wandering his way there. "May I help you?" Harry turned to see an older gentleman, his black suit immaculately crisp and pressed, his maroon tie straight against his white shirt. "I hope so," Harry replied. "I need a tuxedo." "Certainly, sir, this way," the man indicated with a sweep of his arm. "May I enquire as to the event that you need it for?" "A ball for my school," Harry replied. They came to a stop in front of a dozen dummies, all dressed in a tuxedo that Harry assumed were different, not that he could see it. "Do you have a date?" the elderly man asked as he surveyed Harry over the top of his glasses. Yeah," he said, digging into his pocket. "She gave me this." The man smiled as he accepted the swatch of silk. "This should make things easier," he said. "Now, when will you be needing your tuxedo by?" "I was hoping to take it with me," Harry replied. That precludes having it tailor-made," the man mused. "Off the rack it is, then. Although, if you have an hour or so, we may be able to make slight alterations." "I can do that," Harry assured him. "Wonderful," the man smiled. "Now, did you have any particular style in mind?" "Style?" Harry asked, his voice rising in his panic. Not to worry, not to worry. I'm sure that we can come up with the perfect suit," the man said. Stepping back, he examined Harry from head to toe, one elbow cupped in the other hand, while a finger tapped against his lips. His eyes flicked down to the midnight blue piece of silk in his hand before giving a sharp nod. "I think that we might start with the suits over this way," the man said, indicating the tuxedos behind and slightly to the left of him. And that was the start of a grueling 2 hours of Harry trying on pants after pants, followed by shirt after shirt, and then jacket after jacket, followed by ensemble after ensemble. Finally, when he was sure that he was done, it came time to begin deciding upon the accompaniments to his tuxedo: shoes, bow tie, pocket handkerchief, whether a cummerbund was appropriate. At long last, the older gentleman seemed happy enough to shoo Harry from his store, telling him to come back in 2 hours for his final fitting. As Harry stepped out onto Charing Cross Road, all he could hope was that Daphne really appreciated the effort that he was putting in for her. Chapter 18. An Unforgettable You. Disclaimer: I solemnly swear that JKR owns everything Harry Potter. Whether or not I am up to no good with her characters is for you to decide. /0v0 / Sunday, 25 December 1994. Harry's quarters, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry's eyes snapped open. Something had woken him. For an instant, he was back in his cupboard, waiting for Aunt Petunia to start banging on his door, telling him to get up and start cooking the Dursleys' breakfast. And then the canopy above the soft bed registered, and his body relaxed. He was at Hogwarts, but still something had woken him. His eyes darted about, but in the dim light of early morning it was hard to see. Slowly, carefully, he sat up. Lifting one hand above his head, he willed light. The ball of bright white light that appeared lit up the room, and he looked around, trying to identify what had woken him. And then he saw it. At the very end of his bed was a small pile of presents. How they'd gotten there, he had no idea. In fact, Withy were there, he had no idea. And then it came to him, it was Christmas Day. Christmas, with presents. Sure, he knew the concept. How could he not after watching Dudley open mounds of the things every year? But he'd never had any for himself. Leaving the ball of light hanging in the air, he crawled down the bed to examine this wondrous event. There were 5 altogether, each one wrapped in magical paper with animated pictures on it. All at once, the presents blurred, and he dashed a hand across his eyes to wipe away the tears that had appeared. Then, with a grin wider than he'd ever had before, he reached forward and plucked one up, bringing it into his lap. This one was the most badly wrapped of them all, but to Harry it was exquisite. Almost reverently, he turned it over to find an equally badly written note scrawled across the paper. To Harry, Merry Christmas from Hagrid. Eagerly, Harry unwrapped it to find something wooden drop into his hand. Stuffing the paper behind him, his eyes lit up at the beautifully handmade panpipes. The wood was a medium brown, and it took him some moments before he recognized it. Pear wood. Bringing the pipes up to his mouth, he blew into them and promptly frowned when nothing but a wet raspberry sound emerged. Obviously, he'd done something wrong. Well, he reasoned, if Hagrid gave it to me, then he'll know how to play it. I'll simply ask him when I thank him later. Laying the pipes to one side, Harry reached out and plucked the next gift. This one was by far the largest and had arrows all around it pointing upwards. Figuring that they meant this way up, Harry took extra care not to tip it about. Not seeing a note on the outside, Harry unwrapped the gift and promptly stared at the pot plant. Whatever the plant was, it was small with a couple of thin tendrils shooting up from the main stalk, waving merrily away. Tearing his eyes away from the plant, Harry found a small book, Magical Flowers and Their Uses. Opening the first page, he found a note from Neville, identifying the plant as an umbrella flower. Flipping through the book to find the right entry, Harry's eyes skimmed the page and promptly dropped the book. This thingy's going to grow flowers bigger than a beach umbrella. With a shake of his head, Harry carefully placed his new plant on his bedside table before turning to the rest of his gift. The next one he opened was from Daphne. When he opened the simple box, he found a new rune etching kit, much more advanced than the one that he currently had. Hermione's gift, unsurprisingly, was a large book. The title, though, told Harry that it was not only very thoughtful, but would prove to be incredibly useful: charms and enchantments, turning your mundane furniture magical. His last gift was from Susan. When he unwrapped the bright green paper covered in softly falling snowflakes, he found two gifts. The first was a box of chocolate frogs, with a warning note from Susan that they really did jump, so to be careful not to let them escape. The other was a box of something called Dr. Filibuster's Fabulous Wet Start No-Heat Fireworks. Whatever it was, it sounded like a lot of fun. Casting a Quicktempasham, Harry saw that it was only 5:20. The sun may not have even risen yet, but he already knew one thing for certain. This was going to be the best Christmas that he'd ever had. /0v0 / Sunday, 25 December 1994. 12 Grimmauld Place, London. Welcome to the ancestral home of the most ancient and noble House of Black, Sirius said grandly as he flung open the front door of the old, run-down house. Harry took a couple of nervous steps forward, trying hard not to let his thoughts on this ancestral home be displayed on his face. One look was enough to confirm his worst fears. The inside was just as bad, if not worse, than the outside. There was dust and cobwebs everywhere. What brass or silver there was tarnished and dull. There was apparently a carpet runner on the floor of the hall, but it was so dirty that it almost blended into the dark, unpolished wooden floor that it sat upon. The only redeeming feature that Harry could see was the fact that the old gas lights were so dim that it was hard to make out just how dilapidated everything was. "I take it this has been in your family for quite a few generations, then?" Harry asked. "More than 600 years, Sirius confirmed. "Looks it, doesn't it? The house elf whose job it is to keep this place clean has gone a bit batty and hasn't been doing his job for the past decade. Filth, disgrace, begone unworthy blood traitor, brining half-blood vermin into this house." Harry clapped his hands over his ears, dropping his bag in the process, in a vain attempt to block out the terrible screeching that seemed to be coming from a painting. Instantly, Sirius barreled past him, shouting back at the hideous woman that continued to shout as many obscenities as she could. "Shut up, you foul woman. You're dead. Why don't you stay that way and let us live in peace?" This last part was accompanied by serious yanking on the thick red curtains that bordered the painting closed. The instant that they met in the middle, the sound shut out, whether through some sort of silencing charm or something that put the painting to sleep. Harry didn't know. "Sorry about that," Sirius said, running a hand through his thick black hair. "What was that?" Harry asked. "That was my mother," Sirius replied. "I've tried to remove her, but she put some sort of sticking charm on her painting, and I haven't worked out how to get her off the wall yet." Harry merely nodded dumbly. If he had a painting that yelled like that all the time that wouldn't come off the wall, he'd be tempted to simply remove the wall and burn the lot. But then, for all he knew, it was a load-bearing wall and couldn't be removed. "I see your mother's been making your guests feel welcome again," an unknown voice stated. Harry turned to the doorway further down the hall to see a shabbily dressed man. His trousers, shirt, and cardigan all looked worse for wear, even having the elbows of his cardigan patched, from what he could see by the way the man stood there with his arms folded. His face was heavily lined, and he looked tired. Dark circles stood out under his eyes, made all the more apparent when compared to his light brown and grey hair. "Harry Potter, meet Remus Lupin," Sirius beamed, gesturing wildly between the two. "Moony, meet Harry, James, and Lily's son." An uncertain smile appeared on the man, Remus' face as he strode forward. "Harry, it is so very nice to see you again after so many years," Remus said. Harry looked swiftly between the two men. "After so many years?" he asked. "Ah, yes. You see, I went to school with your parents and Sirius here. We were the best of friends, in fact, from the very first day on the Hogwarts Express." "Well, James, Remus and I were the best of friends from then. It took Lily a little longer to warm up to us," Sirius elaborated. "Quite," Remus remarked dryly. "So I take it you knew me as a baby?" Harry asked slowly. "I did," Remus smiled. "And if I might say, you were an incredibly cute baby at that. We all doted on you." "If you doted on me, then how come I don't remember you?" Harry asked Remus. "Sirius I can understand, what with the false imprisonment thing." "Well, there are several factors for that," Remus replied, shifting uncomfortably on his feet. Harry flicked his eyes between the two men again, before making a gesture indicating that he wanted to know exactly what those factors were. "Well, for one, I didn't know exactly where you were," Remus began. "Oh, I knew from Dumbledore that he'd placed you with Lily's sister, and I guess, with my knowledge of the Muggle world, I should have been able to find you, but I put it off." Remus looked nervously at Sirius then, a look that the dark-haired man seemed to understand. "You need to tell him, Moony," Sirius stated. Remus made a face at him, a face that seemed to say something along the lines that Sirius would pay if things went pear-shaped. Finally, Remus lowered his head, saying the next part without once looking at Harry. "I also thought that it wasn't safe for you to be around me. You see, I'm a werewolf." Harry stared at the man, incredulously. "You don't look like a werewolf," Harry finally replied. Serious, barking laughter snapped Remus' head up. "Well, come on, you don't. Werewolves are supposed to be vicious things with long, pointy teeth and sharp claws and fur," Harry said. "I can assure you that, for one night a month at least, I have all of those things," Remus said. "Fair enough," Harry said, pleased that he was preventing his body from shaking the way that it wanted to. "Are you dangerous?" "When I'm transformed, extremely," Remus replied. "The rest of the time, no." Harry nodded slowly. Finally, with a shrug, he decided to put that information aside and think upon it later. "Well, now that that's out of the way, let's do presents," Sirius exclaimed. With a bound towards the door that Remus had originally emerged from, he led Harry and Remus into a small, cozy sitting room. This room, at least, had had the semblance of cleaning. While the couple of couches and armchairs still looked a little the worse for wear, they were at least clean. The main feature of the room was an enormous Christmas tree whose top brushed the ceiling. Baubles, tinsel, gold and silver ornaments, and a host of tiny, Flitting fairies filled it with color and cheer. Seeing the three presents under the tree, Harry slung his bag around and dug inside to pull out the present that he'd gotten for Sirius. He paused them, looking doubtfully at Remus. "It's okay, Harry. You didn't know that I was going to be here," Remus smiled. "Come to that, it didn't know that I was going to be here." Accepting that, Harry went to place the present under the tree before stopping. What was the point of that when you were about to pull it back out and hand it to its recipient? Instead, he simply handed it to Sirius. "Merry Christmas," he said. "Thanks, Harry," Sirius replied, before immediately ripping into the package. "Wow, Harry, a leather jacket," he exclaimed moments later, holding up the black biker's jacket. "You told me about having a bike when you were younger, and it sounded as though you were either going to try to find out what happened to it or buy yourself a new one. So I figured that you'd need something to wear," he explained. "Thank you, I love it," Sirius said, and then did something that his godfather hadn't yet done. He hugged his godson. When they finally separated, Sirius dove under the Christmas tree and pulled out a bright red package. "Merry Christmas, Harry," Sirius said. "It's actually from the both of us." Eagerly, Harry opened his gift to find a soft, dark green-covered photo album. Opening it up, he found a photo of his parents dancing on their wedding day. Hesitantly, his hand reached out to touch the image of the man who looked so like himself, and then the woman with long, dark red hair and eyes exactly like his own. For the first time in his life, he had a picture of his parents, images to go with names. Through his glistening tears, it was hard to focus on the two men. Thank you so very much. I love it. /0v0 / Sunday, 25 December 1994. Harry's quarters, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Finally, Harry's blasted bow tie was on. It was straight and looked just like it was supposed to. 27 times. That's how many goes it had taken him to get the blasted thing tied around his neck. Sure, the old guy who sold him the thing had shown him how to tie it, but that was then, in the shop with someone to guide him. Back here at Hogwarts, with no one to help him, had been a complete nightmare. His black polished shoes clicked as he walked from his bedroom across to the hard-backed chair where he'd left his jacket. Picking it up, he slid it on, checking the cuffs of his shirt to make sure that they were sitting right. His hands then slid down the lapels of his jacket, straightening it and doing up the single button. His fingers passed over the midnight blue silk peeking from his lapel pocket. The silk, of course, perfectly matched his bow tie and, hopefully, Daphne's dress. After running a final finger around the collar to try to alleviate the choking feeling that it was giving him, he picked up the corsage from the table and headed for the door. The journey from the third floor down to the entrance to the dungeons, where he'd agreed to meet Daphne, was filled with a multitude of staring eyes. Everyone that he passed stopped and stared at him, mouths dropping open as he walked past. A couple of guys that he didn't know simply shook their heads, muttering something about how they wished that they'd thought to wear something similar. With all of the staring going on, Harry found himself unconsciously slipping into the shadows of an alcove, while at the same time making sure that he constantly watched out for his date. The first person that he recognized coming from the right direction was unfortunately not Daphne. Some movement on his part must have caught Draco Malfoy's attention, for, just as he and his date, Pansy, Harry thought her name was about to pass, he stopped and stared. Harry stared back, waiting as the other boy looked him slowly up and down before soundlessly opening and closing his mouth, shaking his head, and finally pulling his date along. Twice more, he was given a similar sort of look. Exactly what was going through their minds was anyone's guess, and the more it happened, the less Harry wanted to know. It certainly didn't help that it seemed that he was the only one dressed in pants, jacket, and bow tie. Every single other male that he'd seen was wearing the appropriately name-dress robes. Finally, movement from down the corridor caught his eye. A flash of deep blue caused his back to straighten. As soon as he saw the sparkling blue-eyed young woman, he stepped forward. Daphne was simply stunning. Her gown swept the very edge of the ground from where it had flared out from her hips. Above that, the midnight blue silk hugged her tiny waist, emphasized her bosom, and was held up by thin straps. Hints of sparkling silver were dotted throughout the dress, emphasized by the thin silver linked chain that wrapped around her waist, leaving a single dangling length on her left hip. Her creamy shoulders and neck were accentuated by a sparkling sapphire that dangled from a silver chain around her neck. Daphne's long black hair was pinned up in an elaborate knot around her head, giving her a regal bearing. "You're beautiful," Harry finally breathed when he found his voice once more. "Thank you, Harry," she replied, one eyebrow raised. "I wish I could say the same. All that I can say is, what in Merlin's name are you wearing?" Harry looked down at himself reflexively. Her tone of incredulousness made him think that he'd left off his pants or something. "A tuxedo," he replied, after finding himself properly attired. "Is that what you call it?" she asked dryly. At his nod, she continued, "I distinctly remember giving you a sample of cloth to help you match your dress robesto my dress. You then said that you were going to get them on Saturday. What happened?" "But I did match, see," Harry protested, lightly touching the silk in his jacket pocket and his bow tie. Daphne waved off his protests as though they were inconsequential. "Dress robes, Harry. This is the Yule Ball, not some Muggle fancy dress. If you hurry, there might still be enough time for you to change into appropriate clothes," she instructed, grabbing his arm, spinning him around, and beginning to force march him back towards the grand staircase. Harry dug his heels in, bringing her to a stop. "Daphne, this is appropriate wear for a ball," he stated. "It's a tuxedo, formal wear for non-magical people, and there's no point sending me back to my room to change. I don't have any dress robes, not that I'd wear them even if it'd have them. There's absolutely no way that I'd ever wear a dress, under any circumstances." Daphne stared at him, her cerulean blue eyes boring into his emerald greens. Harry could feel his eyes begin to water as he stared right back. There was no way that he was going to give in first. Eventually, after more than half a dozen couples had filed past the two, Daphne sighed and looked away. "You're really going to wear that in front of everyone?" she asked. "Yes," Harry replied simply. He watched his date closely. She was definitely not happy. Obviously, wearing a tuxedo to a magical ball was a very big faux pas, at least as far as she was concerned. Dropping his head, he stared at the object that he'd been turning around and around in his hands for the past couple of minutes in his nervousness. "Here," he blurted, "this is for you." Daphne looked down at the orchard and feather creation that he held out to her. The white orchids were accented by the crystal pins in the center of them, holding them in place to the deep blue feathers. "What is it?" she asked, curiosity clear in her voice. "A corsage," Harry replied. "I guess that this is another difference between magical and non-magical formal balls. Here, you wear it on your wrist." Then, taking her left hand, he threaded the strap onto her hand. Still staring at the floral arrangement, she adjusted it slightly. "It's beautiful, thank you," she said. "Look, if you'd rather not go in with me dressed like this, then I completely understand," Harry said. Daphne's head snapped up. "If you think that you're getting out of this date, then think again, Harry. You promised to make this night special. I'm holding you to it, even if you do look like some overgrown penguin." A large smile bloomed on Harry's face, and he held out one arm. "In that case, shall we?" he asked. "I suspect that this is going to be a night that I'll never forget," Daphne sighed, taking his arm. Stepping into the entrance hall was exactly what Harry had expected. Dozens of people stopped and stared. It was almost like a great wave passed through the crowd, forcing people everywhere to turn in their direction to see the freakishly dressed boy who lived. "Sweet Morgana in heaven, what in the world are you wearing?" Professor McGonagall asked as she bustled over. "Apparently, it's the height of Muggle formal fashion. Daphne replied dryly. Professor McGonagall stopped and stared Harry up and down. Her lips seemed to get thinner and thinner the more she took in his bizarre appearance. I guess that it's too late to do anything about it now, she sighed. The champions are meeting in the antechamber over there. I suggest that you join them. With a nod, Harry led Daphne away in the indicated direction. I guess she's never seen a tuxedo before, Harry commented. Daphne sent him an exasperated look. I doubt Neon's seen one of them before. Anyone who grew up in the Muggle world would have, Harry countered. We're not in the Muggle world, Harry, Daphne stated. Harry wasn't sure what to say to that, so remained quiet. To cover it, he opened the door to the antechamber. Inside, the three other couples were grouped together, talking quietly among themselves. Harry, Daphne. A girl in a periwinkle blue dress with long, straight brown hair tied up in a knot on the back of her head, exclaimed before rushing across to them. It took Harry a couple of seconds before he recognized his tutor. Hermione, he asked. Yes, Harry, she replied. And don't you look dashing? I think that that's the first tuxedo I've seen tonight. She leaned in then, lowering her voice so that only the two of them could hear her. And I must say that I think that I prefer it. All the other boys look like they're wearing dresses. Exactly, Harry beamed. Hermione stepped back then, taking in his appearance once more. Okay, I've just got to say it. So, Harry, how would you like your martini? She grinned. Harry assumed a haughty look, standing slightly straighter, shaken, not stirred. The two of them then dissolved into giggles. Are you sure that you two haven't already been having too much alcohol? Daphne asked. Oh, Daphne, it's just a Muggle joke. Ask Harry later, perhaps he can explain it to you, Hermione replied. A presence at her side turned Hermione then. You all know my date, Victor. Harry nodded. It's nice to see you again, Victor. You as well, Harry, Victor replied. We have not seen much of you since the first task. No, I guess not, Harry said, taking in not just Victor, but also Fleur, Cedric, and their dates who had wandered over. I really should apologize about that. I know that we're all champions together, but with you guys being so much older and so much more accomplished in the magical arts than me, I've been holed up trying to learn as much as I can to catch up as quickly as I can. It's quite all right, Harry. We all know what you're going through, Cedric said. Not to say that you are only putting in token effort now, Victor agreed. Thank you, Harry replied. The door opening interrupted any further conversation. We are ready for your entrance, Professor McGonagall stated. The four couples shuffled into line, with Fleur and her date in the lead, followed by Cedric and his date, Victor and Hermione, and with Harry and Daphne bringing up the rear. As the doors to the great hall were opened, music flared into life, quickly followed by the applause of the crowd as the four champions and their dates walked into the hall. As they entered, Harry took the chance to look around the room. It was decked out for Christmas with 12 massive decorated Christmas trees, floating candles, soft snow falling from the ceiling that vanished before it reached the heads of the students, ice sculptures, and what looked like entire colonies of fairies flitting about. And everywhere he looked were people in dresses, or at least in either dresses or dress robes, but to his eyes, he really couldn't see much difference. Even the staff at either the big round table on the teacher's platform or darted about the room at the other round tables were dressed the same. Being the only one wearing a tuxedo had Harry feeling incredibly self-conscious, regardless of the fact that he'd rather be the only one doing so than to have been part of the crowd wearing a dress. It was then, as he was looking around, that he spotted something that he thought might help with Daphne's outlook on his attire. Nudging her shoulder gently as they walked, he indicated one of the tables that they were about to pass. Are you sure that you wouldn't rather have me wearing dress robes like that? Harry felt Daphne shudder in revulsion as she spotted Ron Weasley. The ancient maroon robes that he wore clashed horrendously with his red hair. The fact that there were bits of white lace at the cuff and ruff that he'd obviously tried to cuff off didn't help it at all. "In this instance, I think that I'd prefer you in what you're wearing," she murmured, "but only in comparison, Tarthat." Harry chuckled quietly and continued to lead Daphne across the hall. Soon enough, they were up on the staff platform, taking seats around the enormous round table there. Apart from the champions and their dates, the table also held the three headmasters, Ludo Bagman and Barty Crouch. "Well, shall we eat?" Dumbledore asked lightly, before picking up the menu that had been sitting on his plate. Unsure exactly what to do, Harry followed suit, watching Daphne surreptitiously. She obviously noticed, for she pointed to one particular entry, lifted her menu out of the way, and then spoke to her plate. Herb-crusted salmon with Caesar salad. Instantly, the dish that she'd ordered appeared on her plate. With a smile, Daphne picked up her fork and indicated with it for Harry to choose his own meal. With a slight frown on his face, he scanned the menu before finding one that sounded particularly appetizing. Lamb cutlets and rosemary gravy with mixed vegetables. Even though he'd just seen it happen, Harry still goggled at his plate when the requested meal instantly arrived. The dinner then progressed with good food and enjoyable conversation. For the most part, Harry conversed strictly with Daphne, although he did join in on the conversation about Quidditch that Ludo Bagman, Victor and Cedric started up, consequently learning a lot more about the popular wizarding sport than he ever thought was possible. Soon, though, the weird sister Staffan had whispered to him earlier, struck a particular chord that was obviously a cue for the champions. Seeing Victor and Cedric on their feet and offering a hand down to the partners caused Harry to hurriedly shoot to his feet to do the same for Daphne. The four couples proceeded down from the stage to the very center of the room where Dumbledore had cleared an area by the simple method of waving his wand, causing all of the tables and chairs to scoot backwards towards the wall. "Are you ready, Harry?" Daphne asked lightly, pointedly raising her hand ready to accept his own. With a nod and a fortifying breath, he stepped forward, lightly grasping her right hand while sliding his right hand along her side and up her back. "Just focus on me," she whispered. The music started then, and Harry did all that he could to ignore the crowd staring at them. His eyes remained fixed on Daphne's sparkling blue orbs as they slowly waltzed around the room. There were one or two places where he found that he needed to hurry his steps or he'd lose the rhythm, but for the most part he felt that he did well enough. At least, Daphne was smiling, and he hadn't felt himself step on her feet at all. A short scuffle to the side caught his attention, and he looked across to find Fleur's date tripping over the hem of his dress robes. That, at least, was one major advantage of wearing a suit compared to robes. As the waltz finished, they glided to a stop, and he bowed as Daphne curtsied to the applause that the champions were given. And then the dance floor really came alive as couples crowded out onto the floor to join them in the next dance. It was a few hours later that Daphne finally agreed to take a short break from the floor. Harry'd never danced so much in his life, and as much as he was enjoying dancing with the ebony-haired girl, his feet really were starting to kill. "Let's grab a drink and go outside," Daphne suggested. "I'd like to see the rose garden." "Sounds good," Harry agreed. It took them a little while to escape out into the garden, what with the various people, make that the girls, who wanted to have a look at the orchid and feather corsage that Daphne wore. As much as the girls loved it, the boys ended up giving Harry a dirty look. While some had given their dates a flower, it wasn't one that they could wear over the evening. "This is nice," Harry sighed, as they stepped out into the cooler air. All around them, blooms of enchanted roses lined the pathways that had been created. Benches were dotted here and there for people to rest upon as they enjoyed the garden and the clear, star-filled sky above. Slipping her hand into Harry's elbow, Daphne leant her head against his shoulder for a moment. "This has been wonderful," she said. "You don't need to sound so surprised," Harry teased. but I am glad that you are enjoying yourself. To be honest, I wasn't sure that I would, she confided. Your dancing has been much better than your lessons would have indicated, and the less we say about your attire, the better, I think. Their stroll then continued for a little while in silence. It was only after they'd reached the far end of the garden and had begun to make their way back that it was interrupted by the sound of a pair of voices somewhere on the other side of a hedge. So anyway, enough of Boomy. What about you? Which side you got it on? A voice that Harry identified as Hagrid's asked. It is chilly, another voice, female this time, replied. Harry wasn't sure, but he thought that it might have been Madame Maxine's. No, don't go. I've never met another one before, Hagrid protested. And as a what precisely? Madame Maxine asked, her tone icy. Another half-giant, oh course. That was as much as Harry overheard, for as soon as Hagrid had said it, Daphne had hustled him away. Is that why Hagrid's so big? Harry asked once they'd moved far enough away from the two. I'd always wondered what made him so much bigger than everyone else. Daphne made a face. I should have guessed. Harry noticed her shiver then. It was only when he touched her hand that he realized that it wasn't the cold that had her shivering. Her hand was quite warm. In fact, no, it was revulsion of fear that had her shivering. What's wrong? He asked, his eyes narrowed. Hagrid's a half-giant, Daphne stated. Yeah, Harry replied slowly. That's what he said. Giants have a bad reputation for a reason, Harry. They're vicious creatures, always fighting and killing. I think there's less than 100 left in the world, and thankfully, none here in Britain at least. That's what I always thought, she said. Harry looked back down the path that they'd come. There was no sign, or either Hagrid or Madame Maxine. But Hagrid's all right. He's always been nice to me, he said. So far has been okay, Daphne replied. But that sort of ancestry has a way of showing through. It's the same with all half-breeds and dark creatures. What do you mean? Harry asked. There may be some people holocumen, but their pedigree always shows through, she replied, her eyes going somewhat out of focus as she stared at something only she could see. Half-goblins tend to be far too cunning with a propensity for violence. Werewolves can never be trusted, whether they're in their wolf form or human form. Vampires should never be allowed near normal people, period. Centaurs are more likely to point an arrow at you than talk to you. What about Muggle-borns? Harry interjected. They're necessary to our society, and they have the power and intelligence to perform advanced magic, but they'll always be lacking the social graces, wanting to bring in their newfangled ideas, she ranted. Harry stared at his date. This wasn't the Daphne that he'd been getting to know. He wondered which one was the real one, his kind, patient tutor or this prejudiced pureblood in front of him. Do you truly believe all of that? Harry asked. Daphne seemed to focus on him all at once. Her eyes blazed as she stared, before suddenly she looked away. It's what I've always been told, she said quietly. My father has waxed eloquently all my life about this subject. And what about you, Daphne? Do I believe all of that? Harry asked again. You're taking care with Hagrid and charms with Flitwick. You're friends with both Hermione and me. Is that what you truly think about us? Yes, she replied instantly before shaking her head. No. Oh, I don't know, Harry. It's what's said and believed in Slytherin House. Everyone there believes it, or at least no one has ever disagreed whenever the topic has come up. I doubt that I would have ever had to think about it if it wasn't for you. Harry watched her, waiting for her to gather her thoughts. You came here to Hogwarts, and I was assigned as your tutor. You're the boy who lived, like I was really going to turn down the opportunity to learn about you when I was asked. And then you showed up, you and your drawings and painting and talking to dragons, with your weird clothes and ideas. I've never had to think about this stuff before, but it's what I know. Harry stared sadly at the girl in front of him. He wouldn't have guessed that these were the ideologies that she'd been exposed to all her life. And he knew that, As much as he liked Daphne, someone with those beliefs wasn't someone who he wanted to spend a lot of time around. "I think I'm going to turn in now, Daphne. Thank you for the wonderful evening," he said. Before he lost his nerve, he quickly leant in and kissed her on the cheek. From the corner of his eye as he turned away, he saw her raise one hand to the spot where he'd kissed her, and then, thrusting his hands into his pockets, he walked away. He hoped that she'd call after him, but unfortunately, she never did.